Welcome to Fleet's Random Ramblings with your host, who's not sure if he's got flu, COVID, or some combination of the two. Ah! Ugh. But I've never missed a Ramblings. And I am not starting now. Ramblings goes on forever. And I'll not fucking have my perfect record ruined by some wannabe fucking Black Death motherfucker. My lungs might be half full of water, but I'm still gonna keep going. Right. So, you all know the drill, more or less. You all know how this shit goes down. So, I suppose we get cracking, and we just go from there and see what happens. As best we can, I guess. I suppose we get cracking, and we just go from there and see what happens. As best we can, I guess. Had Darth Sidious asked to get us going, had Germany had good quality coal during World War One, would this make any sort of difference in certain battles and situations? It would have made a bit of difference. It would have made sure the coal would have, it would have given German ships an ability to steam faster for longer. And slightly increase their overall maximum speed. No, I'm not okay. I've been ill for like the past week. And it's still not gotten better. I think it might be something serious. I sure hope not. I don't have time to be ill. Being ill is people who don't have fucking lives. I don't have time to be ill. I've got shit to do. I don't think it's COVID. I refuse to believe it's COVID. Even if it is COVID, it's not COVID. I've been vaccinated. I'll be fine. Even if it is COVID, I'll be fine. I don't think it's allergies. At least I fucking hope it's not. I really hope it's not. Problem is, because I'm sick, I can't even get drunk. You can't be drunk when you're sick. Because it doesn't work. No, Arnat, that has to do with the fact that you're running a large mechanical device at high speed. Arnat, that's why. She's... Darth Sidious asks, what was Hood's status during the interwar years? Why wasn't she fully modernized and properly refitted? Simple, she was the most powerful battleship... Well, the most powerful capital ship, period, in the world and the pride of the Royal Navy. There was nothing to take her place, so she had to remain in service until something would arrive to take her place. Zubikaku asks, you want me to answer this scenario? Assuming Japan has the fuel left to do so, they try to pull something similar to Leyte Gulf. Order of battle: Distraction Force, Carrier Amagi, Carrier Katsuyagi, Light Carrier Ryujo, Light Carrier Hosho, whatever destroyers can be allocated, Main Attack Fleet, Battleship Yamato, Battleship Nagato, Hybrid Issei, Hybrid Hyuga, Battlecruiser Haruna, heavy cruiser Tone, heavy cruiser Alba, light cruiser Yahagi, light cruiser Sawaka, various destroyers, and in essence you can force any submarines with standard and torpedoes and a kamikaze wave numbering over 250 planes to type US carriers. How does this new Operation Tengo proceed? They're all dead. They're all dead before they get within gun range of the US fleet. I don't think you quite realise the only reason that Yamato got as far as she did is because she was the battleship Yamato. And it was just one ship. Like, the US didn't actually... Like, the US considered it sort of a laissez-faire operation. They threw some of the aircraft they had at this arriving task force. If you have a full major fleet sortie, you'll have British aircraft showing up from British carriers. You'll have the entire... you'll have a response proportional to the force that's coming at them. You'll not have this almost half-hearted US response like they gave to Tengo. You're talking about a US, hell, no, at this point, an allied response that will put that task force down, especially since, because it's got Issei and Hyuga in it, it'll be only be doing 24 knots on a good day, possibly maybe even 22, 21, maybe even less than that. The US has already shown it can deal blows to a task force larger than that. Like, they dealt with, they punished Centerforce, they punished, Southern Force. If they know this large force is coming, they will move capital ship assets in the way. Because it'll be hard to miss this large force leaving Japan and forming up, so they'll be ready to meet it. It'll just result in a... The reason Tengo was so successful, and that Yamato got as close as it did, is because she was one ship with a few destroyer escorts. She was fairly inconspicuous on the grand sweep of the Pacific Ocean. That force is not going to be missed. That Japanese task force is not going to be missed. The US is going to find it and engage it much further out than Yamato was engaged. It's all going to die. They're all those Japanese destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and carriers are going to die before they do anything. Yes, Arnat, the speed of the High Seas Fleet was determined by the speed of the ships in the fleet. Not their engine type, not their coal type. Darth Sidious asks, had Dönitz been in charge of the German Navy prior to World War II, how would he handle the Navy early on? Hard to say. I know he'll want more U-boats. But that's obvious. You might see the U-boat construction expansion start earlier, but you're definitely going to see Bismarck and Tirpitz finished. You're going to see, Dönitz want the Hippers finishing, for the basic and simple premise that he needs them. Dönitz may like his submarines, but he's not silly. He's not going to just abandon capital ships and just build subs. Because remember, Dönitz stopped Hitler from scrapping the surface fleet. No, Sidious, Tirpitz will be finished on time, because she needs to be. The resources you need to build a U-boat and the resources you need to build a battleship are different. A U-boat is built out of construction steel. It's not armoured. You need steel that can withstand pressures, but you're not armouring it. A U-boat uses diesel engines and electrical generators. whereas Tirpitz has direct drive geared turbines. It's different angles of construction. Zuikaku asks, I've had many a question about the various pre-Yamato designs after Drac posted his video. In case that the Japanese had the fleet building capacity like the US, how many of which variants would you see? You wouldn't see any of the variants. If the Japanese have a capacity to build a fleet equivalent to the US, you're not going to see the Yamato. The Yamato is a result of Japan's basic need to up the scales in terms of raw power of its capital ships. Well, no, Zuikaku. Why would they build a Margis? It would be some form of it'd be some form of new capital ship armed with 16 or 18-inch guns. But as to what form that would take, I have no idea. Darth Sidious asks, from the 4 Bayerns, how would the 2 improved Bayerns look like had they been built? I have no idea. Probably just Bayern, but with a slightly better secondary arrangement and slightly better armor. Basically, that's all. You're looking at very small changes, Sidious. Really, really tiny things here and there. Rune asks, about the occupation of former Axis countries. During the occupation, which lasted several years, did the occupational governments enact any measures to try to remove certain aspects of the cultures of those countries to better normalize those countries? For instance, in Germany, Erich Rohn's sports organizations were dissolved, and in Japan, where certain TV channels were banned. Were those simply reactionary measures, or was it part of some large-scale plan to demilitarize those countries? I have no idea. I have no idea, and I am not the person to answer that question. I like my ships, I like my tanks, I like my planes. I am not a politician, nor am I a very good judge of post-war history. It's a very niche subject to begin with, immediate post-World War II history. That brief period between the end of the Second World War and the true start of the Cold War. Kyle asked... Christ. Give me a second, folks. Okay, we're alright, we're good. Kyle asks, had Lexington or Saratoga been negotiated to be built as battle cruisers like HMS Hood? What would this weird one-off capital ship have done during the interwar and wartime years? Well, first off, she'd be the USN's most prized possession. And presumably they'll be negotiated into basically saying, look, you've got Hood, let us build Lexington. Franz, ain't hell, they haven't created the disease yet that can stop me doing flipping ramblings. I've had this fucking thing for a week. I'm not just gonna sit here and let it fucking run my goddamn life. Because that's what it's been doing for the last week, and I'm flipping sick of it. But yeah, where was I? Oh yeah, so, if you've got one Lexington-class battlecruiser, she's the USN's prize possession. She's their only fast capital ship that can do a speed faster than 21 knots. You're looking at her being the first into the refit program in the 30s. She'll probably be standing in for a full squadron of battle cruisers in the fleet problems. She's the only vessel that can do that. But when it comes to the refit will basically see her lose her ridiculous 33 knot speed for a 31 knot speed, and gain armor that can protect against her own guns. And you're then looking at this ship becoming a well-rounded fast capital ship, and probably the US's go-to vessel to escort fast carrier groups during the first part of the war. If Lexington is lucky, she'll be in San Diego being refitted when Pearl Harbor happens. In fact, it's likely that's where she would be, in all honesty. Zubikaku asks, US Navy Iowa carrier conversions. Would it be feasible? How would it be used? And would they have similar issues as Shinano? It's feasible. How would it be used? As a fleet carrier. I don't know what you were expecting. How shall we use our carrier conversion? I know, we'll park it off Tokyo and sink it as an island. What do you think they were going to use it as? A floating bar fight? No, but in all seriousness, no, they wouldn't have had similar issues as Shinano. Shinano was a unique case where she was both a botched attempt by the Japanese, who hadn't done a large warship conversion before in their entire, well, okay, they'd done Akagi and Kaga, but those were good hulls for the job. The Yamato's hulls were slightly weird, but also you're looking at a ship that is also supposed to be a repair carrier. Like, let's not forget, one of the points of Shinano is she's not supposed to be a carrier. She's a massive repair shop and armoured store for spare aircraft for the Japanese Kiributai. At least that's what she was designed to be. Excuse me just a second, chaps. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm back in a tick. Go. I'm back, and I'm not dead. Good. There we go. Clear throat. Fantastic. I can keep talking myself into an early grave. Marvellous. Brilliant. Just what the doctor ordered. It's given myself esteem. Darth Sidious asks, how expensive were the QEs compared to the R-Class, and why was the R-Class more neglected compared to the QEs during the war years? From what I'm aware, and this is just me going off half-remembered things, so take this with a grain of salt. But from what I can remember, the R-Class were 35% less cost than the QEs when originally designed. And then, once they were oil burners, it was 25% less cost. I don't know. But it was enough that you could get away with building a class of 10 of them, whereas before you'd get a class of 5, possibly 4. And the reason they were neglected, well, they weren't neglected during the early interwar years. It's only when you see the last of the 13.5-inch ships go, and the R's are sitting as the worst vessels in the fleet, that they start to get neglected. It's basically because if you've got limited money to go around, and most importantly, still under treaties, and you can refit some ships but not all, and you've got the QEs, the R's, and the Hood, Renown, Repulse, etc. as your options for refits, your best option is the QEs. They're the most well-rounded capital ships you've got. They're faster than the R's, and they're just better built. You've got slightly more tonnage to play with. The R's are perfectly serviceable as second-line capital ships and just useful to fill out the line. And that's the role they performed during the Second World War. They were bloody good at it. John the Francophile, what a name that is, asks, how was France thinking of expanding the Marine Nationale during the 40s had World War II not started and France not fallen? They were basically looking to return to a third-rank position. They wanted to overtake the Italians with the collapse of the treaties, and they also wanted to have a fleet that could throw hands with a Japanese invasion task force of French Indochina. But you're looking at the French wanting 8 to 10 fast capital ships with 15-inch guns, and about 4 to 6 full fleet carriers of a modern type. The Joffres were going to be the beginning of this, but obviously 1940 intervened, so we didn't get to see that. We know what France's cruiser designs were. They were going towards large 6-inch cruisers, same as the British were, having come to the same conclusion that the British had. So, and we did see some of those completed during the war, so some of those did see action. So yeah, that's basically it. You're looking at basically the French basically adopting the paradigm that the RN and the USN were building: fast capital ships, 6-inch cruisers, and carriers. Razgrees asks, with the United States building of the Mark 14 torpedo, if they were fully functioning, would they have made a bigger impact early in the war? Well, yes, obviously. You're looking at multiple different You're looking at multiple Japanese capital ships being on the bottom of the ocean by 1942, along with a large portion of Japan's merchant fleet following the same. If the Mark 14's working in the early war period, it's rather scary, the sheer amount of bang that the USN will inflict upon the IJN in that first year of conflict. John the Francophile asks, how did the USN come up with a universal 21 knot speed idea, and in what way does it make sense to have it at that speed? Well, it's important to bear in mind that 21 knots was 21 knots was around the speed that everyone else's battle fleets were doing, and it was a good speed to have. It was quicker. It was the speed that most of the world's armoured cruisers were at about 5 years before. It was seen as giving you a useful transit speed of about 12 to 16 knots, a high cruising speed of 18 to 19 knots, and a battle speed of 20 to 21 knots. It was seen as a relatively... It was also seen as a speed you could achieve without breaking the bank in terms of the cost of your capital ships, because as you start going beyond 21 knots, the amount of horsepower you need to go faster than that increases. Not as exponentially as it does when you get beyond 30 knots, but it does start to increase quite substantially beyond 21 knots. And also that was the battle speed at the time. There you are. Razgrees asks, if World War II had gone past 1945, would the US have seen the Montana class? No. Because presuming if World War II is going past 1945, you're looking at if it's the same navally, but just lasting longer with a slightly more brutal land campaign, you're looking at the US transitioning over to carriers heavily, and they'll finish the Iowas, but that'll be it. They're not gonna build the Montanas. Zuikaku, I answered that question in one of the recorded or live ramblings. If you go to the YouTube channel, you can go and find the answer to basically what if it's a similar question, but it was basically what if there had been no treaties or a different treaty. But it's basically I answer your question in that, so. Aerotrain. Well, I know of the Aerotrain, but I think it was a misstep, a rather large misstep, if I do say so myself. It was both. It was both of those things in equal metric. For the US and UK, it was more the former, and for the US, it was the latter reason. But it was both of those reasons at once. As far as I'm aware, none of the Paul from Chicago. As far as I'm aware, none of the standards had triple expansion engines. As let's not forget, New York and Texas are not standards. They are the last of the US's dreadnoughts, but they are not included as part of the what we term standard battle line. So far as I'm aware, they were appended to the end of it after it was realised, oh, these ships have 14-inch guns and can do 20 knots ish. But I don't think they were classed under the standard battle line in terms of being a standard battleship by design. I am sounding like... So far as I'm aware, don't quote me on that. Darth Sidious asks, in your opinion, what was the biggest weakness of each nation's last generation battleships of World War II? Okay. Well, where do I begin? Let me just clear my schnoz, and I shall get to that. 1 second. Yeah. Wasn't quite what I wanted to do. Try that again. Alrighty then. There we go. That's more like it. So, last generation battleships of World War II, let me think. So, we're looking at the Yamatos for Japan, the Iowas for the US, Roma for Italy, Vanguard for the UK, Soviets don't have one, so boo-hoo for them. Richelieu for the French. And no, I think that's it. Biggest weakness, I'll list off one. So so we'll start with Germany. Tirpitz, yeah, she's a Bismarck class battleship, enough said. And she's also a Bismarck class battleship in 1944, enough said. Iowa's belt armor, just armor thickness in general, or lack thereof, was their big weakness. Vanguard, probably if Vanguard has a weakness, it's her slightly elderly main battery. But it's not a bad weakness. I'm clutching at straws to find a real weakness for her. No, not at all. Second armament was not weak on Vanguard. Not at all. Let me just do the old big. Come on, keep your thoughts together. Keep your old thoughts together. That's the stuff. There you go. Alright. Where was I at?
War Plan Pacific.
Bloody hell. That wasn't part of my plan. Well, Vanguard's only real weakness is her her slightly elderly 15-inch guns, but that's basically it. Yamato, her weakness, rubbish, short range and lack of short range and medium range AA. So nothing in the she has nothing in the 40mm range. But that's more just a weakness of Japanese AA firepower in general. Roma, her main battery, or more accurately the shells her main battery, well, both the shells her main battery fires and the rifling twist on the guns themselves, as Drac has already covered in his video on the 15-inch guns of the Rishis, sorry, of the Romas. And as for Richelieu, the arrangement of her, if she could, like that, she's like Vanguard. If she can be said to have a weakness, it's the arrangement of her primary and secondary battery. I don't mind all forward ships sometimes, but I do think that the French made a minor misstep going for that with the Rishis. A traditional 915 would probably have been better. Okay, where were we? Zubikaku asks, I'm curious because I recently picked up some of the War Plan naval games. In the case that the US and Japan went to war during the early US fleet problems came to play, what kind of fight would we see? It's hard to say. You'd have to wargame it out. Because it would depend entirely on what the objectives of both sides were. What was the sort of war they were both looking to fight. It would be massively varied compared to what we saw in the real war. So, like I say, it would be a lot more battleship focused, for fairly obvious reasons. Because yes, you've got carriers, but they'll likely be of a smaller kind than what we're used to. For fairly obvious and valid reasons. But I really can't say much more beyond that. Razgrees asks, with regards to the USS Maine, do you think that the explosion was caused by coal bunker fire or Spanish sabotage? It doesn't matter what I think, we know what caused the explosion. It was a coal bunker fire that set off coal gas. Like, we know what the explosion was. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't change the fact that we know she exploded due to a coal bunker fire. The Spanish never went near the ship. And I don't know why this is still talked about as if it's anything, as if it's up for debate, because it isn't. We know the Spanish didn't touch Maine in any way. Yorkshire or PG tips? Yeah, I'm a PG tips guy. Simple as. John the Francophile. Was the turbo-electric drive propulsion system viable? And if so, should the USN have used it for the North Carolinas, South Dakotas, and Iowas, or perhaps even carriers? Turbo-electric drive was a very 1900s, 1910s solution to the problem of getting range out of the turbines of the day before reliable geared turbines became a thing. However, the thing with turbo-electric drive and its main weakness is that it is very space and weight intensive. It is an effective system, but it weighs a heck of a lot more than an equivalent direct drive or geared turbine setup would. It's the reason why it was dropped, because geared turbines came along that were easier to construct, more reliable, and weighed an awful lot less to put on your ship. You guys are really asking me Discount Drac questions this time. Like, you are really treating me like Discount Drac now. Like, come on, folks. You could ask these of Drac in his live dry docks. Like, come on, folks. But Fleet will answer them, because Fleet does what Fleet does best. Well, I wouldn't say best, but I do it. Where were we? Darth Sidious asked, let's do positives now. In your opinion, what was the biggest strength of each nation's last generation battleships of World War II? Going through each ship again. Tirpitz, she's a mature Bismarck class design with some of the flaws worked out. And she is, despite her Bismarck style flaws, she's got a well balanced, array of armor, speed, and firepower. Rishi, again, a very well balanced ship of armor, speed, and firepower, but also be able to come in from an angle that maximizes her armor effectiveness because of her forward battery. Vanguard, arguably the best battleship ever built, as in terms of an all-rounder that could go faster than 30 knots, and a much superior vessel to the Iowas, but she was very well armoured. Yamato, simply put, she's the most powerful warship in terms of gun firepower ever built. She will slaughter any opposing capital ship in a straight gunfight on a clear day. Iowa, speed. She's the fastest capital ship ever built, in terms of raw speed, from what I'm aware. And Roma, fire control. She's got really good fire control. Zubikaku asks, looking at the classic heavy cruisers of the world in World War II, specifically named ships, New Orleans, Berwick, Takao, Prince Eugen, and Kirov. Which is the best, which is the worst, which are the weaknesses? Worst is Kirov, easily. Best is Berwick. Weaknesses, Kirov is just a fucking hot mess. She's got the weakest guns, the weakest armor, she's the slowest, I think. She's just a massive mixed up mess. Prince Eugen. Prince Eugen is a perfectly acceptable 8-inch cruiser, but she's massively overbuilt for what she should be. Takao, again, a fairly effective 8-inch cruiser, but slightly could do with more armor on the turrets. Beric is the perfect 8-inch streety cruiser, especially with the armor add-ons they get once World War II starts. New Orleans is an effective cruiser, but again, it could probably do with more armor. So my honest, hang on. Razgrees asks, do you think the USS Obanus enlisted incident occurred where the enlisted sailors threw potatoes at a Japanese sub? That's anyone's guess. Could have happened, could have not happened, I don't know, honestly. I can see it being something that could happen in the myriad of incidents that was the Second World War, but I don't really want to call heads or tails either way on it. UNC Samurai asks, other than sell it as a rat extermination service, what could Brunel have done to improve the viability of atmospheric railways as a mass transit system? Do you want my honest answer? Because it's going to be very boring. Given the technology of the time, nothing. You can't make the atmospheric railway work. Well, not more viable than it already was. Razgrees asks, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the major world navy aircraft carriers during World War II? Crikey, you don't ask much, do you? Just, here you go, Fleet. Will you casually break down every major carrier class in the Second World War for me? You don't ask much, do you? Oh. I forgot to ping the roll. Whoops. I forgot to ping the roll. I'm very sick. You can tell I'm sick because I forgot to ping the Fleet's Random Runnings roll. It's just lucky you guys all turned up. Oh, for God's sake, please. You got pinged. I didn't release a ping. I'm fairly certain. I don't know what's going on. Really? You did? It's strange. Oh well. I'm too sick to look into it. I suppose I'll talk about it later. Well, I'll have to come back to strengths and weaknesses of major navies aircraft carriers, because that's a really big topic. Suffice to say, Japanese carriers, that's a really complex kettle of fish, because there were a lot of different one-offs and two-offs that the Japanese built. But Japanese carriers' main weakness overall was AA protection. British carriers were armoured, but had slightly smaller flight characteristics and ability to launch large strike waves. US carriers, again, vulnerable at first because of lack of AA, but they fixed that, whereas the Japanese just did not. And just an ability to launch and field larger strike packages than the British could. There you are. I don't know, Azumi Kark, I'm going to be honest with you, I can't answer the questions as the same as for the cruisers. As the smaller in ships you get, the less I know. Wow, nearly up to double digits, and it's just little old me. Christ, you're all turning up to just listen to a sick daft bugger talk about things he just has layman's understanding of. Christ, I really must be losing my touch if people are actually turning up to watch me talk. Jesus. Zuikaku, I said, like, I saw that one. Did you not hear the answer I gave? I said, like, I don't know enough about the destroyers of the World War II period to actually answer that question appropriately. Arnat asks, would it have made sense to up-armour some of the more absurd French-Italian destroyers to get some semi-competent light cruisers? No. No, it would not. They're not built for it. And they're not designed to take the armour either. So it wouldn't actually get you much instead of really unstable ships. Darth Sidious asks, which classes fail to do the fundamental job of their classes? Jesus, you don't ask for much, do you? I can't answer that question because I don't know every single warship class ever built well enough. Like whereas Drac could probably pull a fucking example out of his head without having to go look at a book, I'd have to go and dig through all 4 of my Conways to actually have a chance in hell of answering that question properly. Off the top of my head, I suppose I'd have to say that the prize for that little number for me would have to go to the Type 1A, the very little known Type 1A U-boats of the Kriegsmarine, the first modern U-boats of the Kriegsmarine that were so utterly terrible they never even saw war service. Oh no, they saw some war service, but they were so terrible. Yeah, they only built 2 of the bloody things, and they lost both of them. They rolled terribly. They were just utterly shite. Though the design was thoroughly reworked. Into the Type 2, which was the smaller variant, and the Type 7, which was a larger variant. Where are we? Give me a second, chaps. I'll be right back. I have to go and get myself some vapor rub because, well, obviously I'm trying to keep myself from falling over. Don't die and don't go away. I'll be back in just 2 minutes. Hello, it's me. I'm back. In a world where the Yamato would have been taken by the US Navy and pressed into service, instead of 10 going to die... fucking hell. That joke's terrible, you should feel bad. What kind of refits would you see it being put into the 50s and 80s, assuming she is used alongside the Iowas? How long will they be used, and in the end, would they be given back to Japan to be created as a museum ship? I know what's happening to the Yamatos. They'll be examined. Sorry, Yamato will be examined, and then she'll be towed off on a merry little journey to Bikini Atoll. The US don't want to take her into service. She doesn't fit in with their doctrine. She's too slow to be a carrier escort. She's just not fit for a post-50s Navy. That's not some form of bullshit man in the high castle IJN that's won the war. And yes, Salix is right, there's no spare parts. Oh no, not that. If I see one more reference to that sodding American Yamato, I'm going to yeet it off a 5-story cliff. There are no spares. The US has no use for her. She's too slow. It's like that bloody stupid Dutch fan fiction Dutch East Indies worshipping wank. You know the one, far aft and faintly, with the bloody converted British 13.5-inch ships as battle carriers. Fucking... Ugh, I don't even want to remind myself as that one. Ugh. It's that similar sort of alt history bullshit where people don't understand how things fucking work. Ah, jolly good job, chaps. I'll tell you one thing. OE of Little Faith, actually doing this has made me feel much better. It's forced my body to lift a lot of the awful stuff off of my lungs. My throat's clearer than it's been all day. And it's opening up my sinuses again. So doing ramblings is curing me. We've healed Fleet. I wonder. Stress home. I'm not stressed. Let's mock You do not mock the Hosh. Well, the worst thing you can say is no. Oh, no. I can't identify that ship because that ship doesn't exist. It's a mashing together of a bunch of different Japanese ships. Why go for 2 triples and 2 twins super firing? Well, first of all, it was cheaper. And also, it was easier. You can get away like a triple and twin of a triple and a twin of the same caliber. A twin super firing, including the weight of the barbette it's raised up on, will weigh about the same as a triple that's on the deck, because obviously the weight of the extra barrel and the mechanisms needed to house it. By World War II, mechanical fire computers were ubiquitous. By World War I, they were common on capital ships. By World War II, they were ubiquitous. I mean, I don't know. That's not a Nagato. not a Nagato, France. They've just picked a random Japanese battleship to make a look-alike of. There's differences between that ship and Nagato, it's not even funny. There are similarities, but it's not meant to be any specific Japanese capital ship. Well, I suppose we've really got. Why is it the one day that I'm sick is the day when I have one of the largest audiences I've ever had for a solo ramblings, and one of the most engaged audiences I've ever had for a solo ramblings, with lots of people asking questions. That's fucking ironic. Atlantropa, the project that would have absolutely doomed Europe to a fucking disaster of ecological proportions. What fun it would have been. Is there a rough estimate on the accuracy of those devices for World War I, World War II given specific inputs, or did it vary a lot by... Yes, it varied a lot by nation ship. What's the most interesting designed French battleships in the Gascogne or Alsace designs? Basically, whichever one was the most outlandish and away from what we would consider normality. I'm not too familiar with the various sketch designs and workup designs that they made. In all honesty... Ooh, good lord. Zuikaku asks, out of Giulio Cesare, Gangut, Hiei, Queen Liz, and Tennessee, what's the best modernization for a dreadnought / super dreadnought? It's Queen Liz. By a head and shoulders. She's miles better than any of the other modernizations. It's almost scary just how much better she is. What would a modernized Bayernov look like? Basically, look at what happened to the German pre-dreadnoughts, then apply that same principle to a battleship, and you've pretty much got it. You're looking at a very, very basic modernization that will basically change very little. And also, if she's being kept by a Weimar Germany. Oh, the bloody jet train! I hate the jet train. It killed my family. Killed my family, the jet train. Ran them over. John the Francophile asks, what American battleship should have been preserved but wasn't? Probably one of the standards. One of the standards should have been preserved. Probably West Virginia. But sadly they got nuked and then scrapped. Razgrees asks, shouldn't the UK have sent their carriers to the Pacific earlier than they did? No. We were busy mopping up the Mediterranean and Europe. It's also worth pointing out that King was very adamant that the Pacific was the US's show, and that any significant Royal Navy commitment should either be able to A, stand on its own, or B, be subordinate to the US's command. And since the RN wasn't willing to do that until 1945, e.g., have an independent task force that could function on its own without the US having direct oversight over it, we didn't send anything. Zuikaku asks, looking at the two major nations which use light carriers. Hey, what about the UK? Well, I know why you've left out the UK, because our light carriers were just better than everyone else's by a country mile, because they were purpose-built. But jokes aside, Chitose is better than Independence, basically because the Chitose class were designed with carrier conversion in mind, so were much better in terms of they were just better when they came out of the yards because they were designed with that role in mind, whereas the Cleveland class, so far as I'm aware, wasn't designed to be converted into a carrier. No, the Chitose class were designed with that in mind. Basically, Japan designed a lot of large ships with carrier conversion in mind. Even a few liners were designed with that in mind and were converted. The Japanese had a lot of capacity ready to go at a moment's notice. Oh, I do love the Syphax. I love the Syphax. She's just such a handsome-looking protected cruiser, and one of the first proper protected cruisers ever built. Look at her, such handsome lines. Hosho was a training carrier, from what I'm aware of. Training and reserve carrier. Why is the best looking warship ever the seaplane tender Commandante Test? I do not know what she looks like. I'm gonna have to take an L on that one and say I'm not. I'm not entirely convinced she's the best looking warship ever. She's got an attractive look to her, but I wouldn't say she looks better than Hosh.
Alright, let's look this thing up.
Where'd you spring from? Don't spring up on me like that. What did I tell you about jumping up here without permission? Because I was on a roll. I was going places, doing things. Jumping up here and making me look...
Let's see here.
You make me... God, Which would have been easier to preserve, USS Franklin or USS Enterprise? Enterprise, because she was more famous, but neither of them were going to get preserved because the will wasn't there. How active was the Swedish Navy during World War II? Very, very, very active. The Swedes were exceedingly active during the Second World War. Basically, doing constant neutrality patrols and shadowing any warships that came near their territorial waters. Basically, every time a German surface warship moved, it had a Swedish shadow. I'm not even kidding on that point, that's just true. Yes, they had large ships. They have the 3 Sverriers and their threesome of cruisers. Tre Kronos, I think? I think they had... Yeah, they had the, no, they're 2 Tre Kronos. Yeah, excuse me. Dear Fleet, is the Dornier Doe 10 automatically the best seaplane, or do you have an option? Well, first off, it can't be automatically the best seaplane, because that's not a seaplane. It's a flying boat. A seaplane has floats. Flying boats use the hull of the aircraft as the thing to take off and land from the water. So it can't be the best seaplane. But no, it's not the best flying boat. No, the best flying boat ever built was the Saro Princess. The Saro Princess was a wonderful design. Good stuff. Where were we? Trying to keep ahead of myself. When did the Navy start using submarines for espionage purposes as a primary role for them? As soon as submarines were practical. Pretty much. As soon as it was practical to use them as such. Zubikaku asked, had the French battleship Jean Bart at Casablanca been fully completed with a well-trained crew and was mobile, could she have taken on and defeated the South Dakota class that was present, which they think was Massachusetts? Yes. Yes, they could have. Like I said, it would be a coin flip. It would be a coin flip, just like every other one-on-one battleship engagement would have been.
Did the French have radar at that point?
Doesn't matter. It was a good enough night. The visibility was good enough to actually enable accurate shooting. I hate it. Thank you, Query. I hate it. Sierra has a point.
Yeah, that's...
Sierra has a point. We've got bloody Ranger standing there with her SBDs going, ooh, new targets. Well, no. Ranger doesn't get hate. It's just she's just recognized as being what she is. It's not her fault. She's just recognized as being this slightly off-kilter carrier design. She's not a bad ship overall. She's just not. She was just a step in the slight wrong direction, a little bit.
Well, her biggest contribution was training, figuring out, how to carry her.
Well, yes and no, but I'd argue that Langley and Lexington had already done that. Langley and the Lexingtons had already done that legwork. Ranger was supposed to be the first of a new paradigm of American carrier, and they misstepped in somewhat spectacular fashion. Although she wasn't a useless vessel by any metrics that mattered. And I mean that. Oh boy. Man overboard!
Well,
I'm alright, I swear, I'm alright. Had the Ranger Marina been a bit more aggressive, and had the support of the
Ranger... Sierra, that was the point I was about to make. Where did they even have the fuel to do that? Yeah.
Yeah, even assuming they do, it's still a bit, yeah. Doesn't really... But assuming they have the fuel, the RN's gonna meet them. The problem is, it wasn't the Italians weren't aggressive, it's just they didn't have the fuel for large fleet sorties. It's the reason why you only see 1 or 2 Italian capital ships go out at once. Because they don't have the fuel to do anything else. And they cannot just magic fuel into existence. No matter how much they might want to.
I mean, if they are being more active, I think that's going to mean each group, each sortie they have is going to be smaller overall. Like send out maybe a couple of cruisers and a few destroyers, which I think means their escort forces are just going to be attritioned away. And they'll probably just have a fleet of capital ships at the end with nothing to escort them.
Pretty much, yeah. I'd argue she was not overconfident. Darth Sidious asks, was she overconfident in the capability of the High Seas Fleet when they planned what would later become the Battle of Jutland? No. Given that the High Seas Fleet was basically steered into a trap by Room 40, the fact that Shea kept Jellicoe reacting to him, and that the run to the south resulted in the loss of multiple British battle cruisers, while there were other factors, the German fleet gave a bloody good account of itself at Jutland.
Yeah. Doesn't help that Beatty was incompetent. So I watched Dr. Alex Clark's video on basically what if Sturdy had had command of the battle cruiser fleet. It ends much worse for the Germans.
Basically.
So the Germans got really lucky there.
They did. My research paper over the USN and their funding fights during the interwar period had a page and a quarter devoted to the serious flaws of Ranger and how it was caused by means of corporate mismanagement, government budget cuts. Oh god. I'm dead. I'm dead. Fleet's gone. That's it, folks. You're talking to a ghost now. I'm on the floor.
I'm on the floor.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, I guess this is my show now.
Oh, Drac. Oh, Drac. You've got feedback.
Oh, hello. Oh, hello.
Am I?
Yes, very bad.
Yes, very bad.
Is anyone else hearing that?
Or is it just me?
Yep, I'm hearing it.
Sorry for bothering you. Oh, ouch. Still there.
Okay, I don't know what's going on with that. Hang on a second. Is that any better?
Let me just have a check. There we. Oh, that's. No, it's
Nope.
still.
Nope. I can still hear it.
What about if I do this?
Let's have a check. And yep, there we go. Fantastic. That's well, as long as I don't speak.
Nope, I can hear it.
That's
Okay, I think I just need to turn the speaker volume down.
that might help a tad. Or perhaps you are coming through very as though it sounds to me as though you're right up against your mic a tad. So maybe turning the mic gain down a tad might also help. Combination of the two factors might solve
Now the mic gain's turned to the normal setting. Hang on a second. Because I've not had this problem before.
Yes, it's suddenly appeared as though it came out of nowhere.
Let me disconnect and reconnect.
Ah, I see.
And here I was about to stage a hostile takeover of Fleet's random ramblings.
No one can take over Fleet's random ramblings, not even Drac. It's my show. I am the one who rules. Well, I say that, but
Mate, you fell on the floor.
I didn't actually fall onto the floor. I just So yeah, well, the vessel that was Ranger, yeah, she was restricted, but was basically the US trying to go, how much can we squeeze out of the ship? In order to get as many carriers as we can. They realised that trying to build smaller carriers was a somewhat flawed concept when they actually finished Ranger, and then they reverted to larger carriers with Yorktowns, because Ranger was actually built to be smaller than the treaties required. She was only a 15,000 ton carrier, I think was the aim.
How's this?
A little better.
Oh, I think I still hear it.
This is really weird.
How bizarre. Yeah, it's just come up this one time. It's rather bizarre. Oh, hello. I think that might have gotten. Oh, that's quieter now. Yep, that's just. About... Oh, never mind. As long as I don't speak too loudly, it seems to be all right.
How about this if I temporarily switch to push to talk?
That may actually do the trick. Yes, as long as it doesn't bother you too much.
Yeah.
So thanks for showing up. It's awfully decent of you.
I'm just working my way through emails today. Well, I've finished the Wednesday video for this week, so I'm doing some emails before I head down to get some food and so forth. And just a quick heads up, spoiler alert for those of you who are around in the UK. On November the 4th, I'm going to be doing a tour of HMS Warrior and HMS Victory at Portsmouth Historic Dockyard. Possibly Mary Rose as well, depending on time, and obviously if something's happened to Warrior or Victory where one of the other is closed, we'll go straight to Mary Rose instead. But essentially, if you want me to give you a sort of 5 to 6 hour tour of Portsmouth Historic Dockyard, then November the 4th at Portsmouth.
You know, I wasn't planning on doing any long distance driving this year, but I'm sure I could. I'm sure I could do Lincoln. I'm sure I could do Lincoln to Portsmouth in one day. I'm sure I could do that if I get up early.
To be honest, actually, the high speed trains, you might actually get away with it.
I mean, with the introduction of the new Lincoln to London service by LNER, I could take that to London, then hop on a train to Portsmouth. It could be doable.
Yeah, or because there's Waterloo to Portsmouth trains, or I could pick you up from like the station near where I am.
I mean, I wouldn't want to put you under that much pressure, Drac. I mean, I feel like I'd be imposing.
I literally drive past the station.
I mean, I'll have to DM you on that at some point in the future. Then, if I.
But yeah, that's entirely up to you. But anyway, yeah, the only price involved is, of course, you have to pay for your own admission ticket, which is slightly cheaper if you book in advance.
Yes.
I'm not charging for it.
No, of course not. I would imagine that would be a little where were we? Questions.
I have to say, I am getting very tired of being an ocean and half a continent away from the UK. There's so much stuff I can do over there, but
I'll be back in the States January, February next year.
Okay.
Zubikaku asks, I've done a bit of research into Mussolini's policies with the British and the French. Had the British and the French conceded to him and Mussolini joined the war on the side of the Allies because of that, how mildly annoyed would the Kriegsmarine be, knowing that the Regime Marine would be adding their forces to the Marine Nationale and the Royal Navy? Bloody hell. Sorry. Well, if the Regime Marine is joining the Marine Nationale and the Royal Navy, well, that's the least of Hitler's problems. The first one is that he's got another front to deal with over the Austrian Alps. Secondly, in terms of capital ships, it just adds more capital ships to what the British and the French can actually throw at the Germans. And who knows, maybe the British might actually fix the Italians' gun issues for them by actually watching the guns fire and be like, ah, there's your problem, you see.
Well, you've also got the fact that even if France falls to Germany, which, okay, it very well may do, if in this time, because that's the Italian intervention in the south wasn't really the tipping factor in that particular campaign. If the Italians are allied to they're part of the Allies, And obviously there's all sorts of things, because obviously Italy has a border with the expanded Germany in 1939, so whether or not that would actually, whether Hitler would actually go for France is another matter, but let's assume that he does. You've got no British engagement in North Africa, which means no Africa campaign, which means lots of British resources are spared from there. And given that historically the Mediterranean was mostly supposed to be looked after by the French Navy, with a sort of placeholder Royal Navy presence, in this scenario, you would switch over to the Regia Marina, doing most of the job of holding down the Mediterranean with a token Royal Navy presence, which means that most of the ships that were in the Mediterranean fleet and even in Force H could go over to the home fleet to deal with the Kriegsmarine.
And then when Japan starts getting uppity, because they have to, like, this is the thing that people forget, Japan is not like the other Axis powers, where they have the luxury of just picking and choosing. They're on that time limit imposed by the US embargo on oil. They've got a 3-year window to move.
Which does actually bring up a rather interesting issue, which is that although not all of the British armoured carriers were up and running by the time Japan got involved, a good portion of them were, and without a Mediterranean campaign, there's very little risk of ships like Illustrious and Formidable being heavily bombed by Fliegerkorps 10 and the Regia Aeronautica, which means that the Royal Navy is going to have more carriers. There's the butterfly of the fact that Ark Royal's probably not at Force H, so probably doesn't get torpedoed either, although she might be hit somewhere else, who knows. And that means that when Japan does get involved, then you've, at the very minimum, got a substantially more powerful Royal Navy presence that can be sent to the Far East to try and counter the Japanese advance into the Indian Ocean, or possibly, although somewhat less likely, you might have a Royal Navy fleet with some Regia Marina backup. The main reason I say why it's less likely is because Mussolini's not going to have a huge interest in fighting the Japanese, and most of the Regia Marina ships are relatively short range, so wouldn't necessarily be that suited for operations in the Indian and Pacific Oceans.
That being
But
said,
he might send a handful of ships along just for fun.
there is one way I do see that the Regia Marina might get involved heavily in the Far East. With their submarines. The Italians have been building a large amount of long-range submarines that aren't really suitable for the Mediterranean, but are suitable for work in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. So you might see a lot of Italian submarines doing work, because they have torpedoes that actually work. So, you know.
This is true. I mean, the other thing is that if you have the British trying to put together a carrier group, there may be some quid pro quo going on in terms of ultimately the British are still going to want to, come late 1941, they're going to want to be keeping the majority of their fast assets back in the UK, because if we assume that the Northern European naval campaign has gone as it did historically, which it may well not have done, given how many additional ships the UK will have to throw at the problem, but assuming that it does, you've still got the two Scharnhorsts and Tirpitz at the end of 1941 as potential issues. And again, assuming the historical timeline, now that Hood is gone, you've got King George V and Prince of Wales, plus Renown and Repulse, and those are your only fast capital assets in the home fleet area. So the British are going to want to keep those around, but realistically, with the Cavours, the Duilios, and the Littorios in the Mediterranean, the Germans don't have any chance of getting into the Mediterranean anyway. So you could potentially see a scenario where the British might persuade the Italians to send a Littorio or two, either in exchange for trade goods or potentially in exchange for sticking a couple of British battleships in the Mediterranean. Because although, yes, somewhat short range, the Littorios do have that key factor, which is speed, which means that if the British have 3 or 4 carriers sent to the Far East, a couple of Littorios could keep pace with them and allow the entire formation to operate at high speed, which is going to be a bit important considering the Japanese forces that they can put in the area.
I would also like to, just on that topic, you've actually raised something that I just thought would be an even better sweetener for the Italian Navy. Because the Aquila project's probably still going to be started by the Italian Navy, even if it's in the Allies. What better sweetener for the Royal Navy to offer the Italians than help with getting Aquila up and running, and during the design process for her, than saying, look, you help us in the Pacific, we'll help you get Aquila up and running, and we'll even provide you with Buccaneers, Seafires, whatever, to help get the ship up and running. And then she can come and help us in the Pacific when she's ready. Which is somewhat...
I mean, it's possible, but the Aquila project is going to take a lot longer, because bear in mind, she was only just about approaching completion when Italy threw the towel in 43.
That's true.
But she's a long way away from being complete.
Will she be ready?
I'll tell you what would actually be useful outside of the Littorios, though.
Go on.
Would be the Capitani Romanis, those little 3,500-4,000 ton micro cruisers that they built to fight the French contre-torpilleers, because those things would be absolutely perfect for murdering large numbers of Japanese destroyers.
Oh god, yes, completely. A lot of the Italian cruisers would be actually good counters to the Japanese cruisers, because they're also treaty breakers.
Yeah, it's just I don't think they're going to be sending a massive contingent of their ships, because they're going to want to secure the Mediterranean. But if the two biggest things they could help with would be fast battleships and anti-destroyer swarm killers.
Yeah, and of course the Italian submarine arm.
Yeah, well, having functioning torpedoes is quite useful, and the Italian weaknesses against ASW in the early part of the war are rather handily countered by the fact the Japanese basically don't have much anti-submarine capability.
Yeah. Just promise Mussolini he'll get Taiwan after the war's over, and that'll sweeten the pot enough for him to come in.
And just follow standard British practices, like, here is a list of Japanese colonies. We will now equally distribute them between our allies.
Yes. I mean, the Italians do offer another backstop to the Allies in the form of Italian East Africa, which at this point will include Ethiopia, sadly. But hey ho, we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it post-war.
I mean, there is also, it's slightly away from the naval side of things, but even assuming that the Italians just decide we're going to hold the line on the northern Italian border and not actively invade Germany, it means you've actually bypassed a huge chunk of the middle war period, because you'll probably still have Operation Torch, the invasion of the French holdings in North Africa, but that'll be a hell of a lot easier without all the fighting in the desert. The fact everyone can just roll up through the Italian held territories and go, hello, land invasion, as well as seaborne. And you don't have any landing. You don't have to worry about landings in Sicily. You don't have to worry about landings on mainland Italy. And actually, it gives the Allies a land border with the Third Reich, which means that, I wouldn't necessarily, because of the Alps and everything, I wouldn't necessarily want to make Italy the primary thrust into Germany. You're probably still going to have to do Operation Overlord, but with all the resources you've saved, you can probably put a good chunk of Allied ground forces in Italy and hit Germany from both places at the same time. And also in the bombing campaigns in most of the bombing campaigns, it would actually allow a lot of the earlier Allied bomber offensives, when they're still using Wellingtons and so forth, to reach a lot deeper into Germany, and potentially, once even you've got the 4-engine bombers going, allow the 4-engine bombers to either reach still deeper into the Third Reich or carry heavier bomb loads to targets they historically visited, because instead of having to fight your way, fly from England across the English Channel, fight your way over northern Germany, hit targets, and then do that gauntlet again, you can just fly into Germany and then head south and land in Italy. Which further actually complicates things for the Germans, because not only do you have shuttle bombing runs, you can also launch bombing runs from both directions at the same time. So instead of the Germans building a air defense system that's primarily oriented towards attacks from their northwest, they're going to have to build two entire sets of air defense systems, with another one oriented to bomber streams coming over the Alps. And the limited number of Luftwaffe night fighters, for example, might be having to deal with multiple targets being hit, or targets being hit from multiple directions on the same night.
And of course the Italians can also contribute, because the Italians were basically one of the only Axis powers to properly get a 4-engined heavy bomber into service during the Second World War, in the form of the P-108. So then you'll also have Italian bombers joining in by 1942, which just makes it even funnier. Just mixed RAF, Italian, and USAF formations. Just. Where was it? There was a question I thought was quite good. Darth Sidious, how would Mez el-Kabir play out in the lateless scuttling at Toulon? Well, first off, Mez el-Kabir doesn't need to happen, because the Italian Navy's on our side. So, a few old French capital ships and Dunkirk and Strasbourg are not that big of a deal if they are handed over to the Axis, because the Italian Navy can deal with that. At least I think they can. I hope they can.
Yeah, I mean, the British probably wouldn't be very enthusiastic about the possibility of the French fleet falling into German hands, generally speaking. So something like Mers el-Kabir might still happen, and certainly the idea of denying the French Navy to the Germans would still be a high priority, but with the Italians on side, so a greater preponderance of Allied naval firepower, and also the Italians, one of the concerns being the Italians having colonies near Mers el-Kabir and the Italian Navy being the one that's in closest reach, it means the whole situation is significantly less on a time limit. So rather than basically showing up and going, okay, well, these are your choices, we need your decision in the next 24 to 48 hours, the Royal Navy can afford to show up off Mers el-Kabir and say, right, here are your choices, but we've got a lot more time to negotiate, because frankly there's nothing the Germans can do about it.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh. I mean... No, the whole point with the... No, the whole... I mean, if the Italians are allied to the French, it's not going to fall into Italian hands if it escapes to Italy, because it'll just be the French fleet in exile. The Italians won't take it over because they're allied to the French. At least that's the basic metric I'd look for. Oh, this is a good one. I couldn't... Sorry, you'll have to excuse me, Drac, I'm a little bit ill. Darth Sidious asked this question and I couldn't really answer it, but you might be able to. Which classes, as in ship classes, fail to do the fundamental job that ships of the class they are supposed to be able to do? It's like which destroyer failed at being a destroyer, which battleship failed at being a battleship, etc., etc.
Okay, 2 seconds.
Dear. Phew. Well, we'll
Right, so ships that failed at... well, I'm always going to point to the Indefatigable class. or specifically Indefatigable herself, because they took everything that a battle cruiser, or a British first-generation battle cruiser, was designed for and threw almost all of it out the window.
They were worse than the ships that came before them, which is an achievement.
Yeah, it's, the whole point of the battle cruiser was it's fast enough to dictate the range, and it's heavily armored enough that it can engage enemy armored cruisers at a range where the armored cruiser can't hurt it, but it can hurt the armored cruiser. That is their entire point. And by going with 4-inch armor over the fore and aft magazines, they'd essentially just made a large, fast, very, very heavily armored cruiser that couldn't actually go toe-to-toe with lesser armored cruisers, because it actually had worse armor than a lot of period armored cruisers, and bigger magazines to be set off.
Like, I've often said that in a fight between Invincible and Blucher, it'd be a 60-40 in favour of Invincible. You put Blucher up against Indefatigable, I'm going to twist those odds the other way. 60-40.
Well, Blucher is still is only using the same guns as the Scharnhorst armoured cruisers. So, in theory, Invincible can just pick a range, sit at that range, and blast away. Now, with the number of guns that Blucher has, Blucher can, in theory, mess up Invincible's upper works and so forth, but as was actually proven by the Battle of the Falkland Islands, the belt armor of the Invincibles is capable of resisting the German gunfire entirely. So the Citadel's not at risk, the turrets aren't at risk, as long as Blucher's gunfire doesn't overwhelm the spotting, doesn't manage to somehow hit the spotting tops or the bridge. Even if she comes away quite waterlogged from having her ends riddled, it's Invincible's fight to lose. The flip side is if you put Indefatigable in that fight, Blucher is entirely capable of detonating Indefatigable by punching shells into its fore and aft magazines.
And with the amount of rounds that Blucher will be putting down range, that becomes more and more likely as the fight goes on.
Yes. Now, obviously, Indefatigable still has 12-inch guns, which can severely hurt Blucher, but, Indefatigable costs a lot more than Blucher.
Yes, she does.
I mean, you've got the in terms of battleships, I suppose, if you wanted to be cruel, you could look at the Espanias, because
don't rag on the Espanias.
Well, to be fair, if there's one thing the Indefatigables could be, it would be the Espanias.
Yeah, unless the Espanias get lucky.
Yeah, but with the speed differential, even an Indefatigable can win that fight, because essentially neither ship has any degree of protection against the other's guns. Their firepower and actually gun layout is actually very similar, which means that the only real deciding factor there is the fact that Indefatigable, with that significantly greater speed, can choose when and where it engages.
Yeah, you've got me there.
I mean, to a certain extent, you could probably also, if you wanted to use their actual historical usage, you could probably actually poke fingers at the Issei. Because while the Fusos went down in glory, they did actually at least try. Whereas the Issei's history was built as battleship, never saw any action as battleship, was never ever really seriously deployed into a potential action as battleship, was essentially just sat around at home doing not an awful lot, then was converted to weird hybrid carrier, then was used as bizarre hybrid carrier cargo ship, then died slowly to airstrikes in Japanese home waters. It never actually did anything in the battleship role, which, as I say, at least Fuso and Yamashiro went down trying to do that, and Nagato showed up at Samar.
I mean, you could argue, Drac, that you've actually hit a double whammy there. Not only have we got the battleship that failed at being a battleship, we've got the battle carrier that failed at being a battle carrier. So you've hit a real home run with picking the Isseis.
Yeah, I mean, cruisers that fail to do their job as cruisers, that's actually quite difficult because cruisers are supposed to do almost anything. So any cruiser that does anything at all at some point is probably going to merit that designation. Although,
I've got it.
if there was...
Deutschlands. The Deutschlands failed at doing what they were meant to do. They were utterly terrible at being these ships that were supposed to tie up the RN because they got destroyed every time they went out trying to do raiding. Apart from the times they succeeded.
True, but at the same time, they still could do the cruising job. The fact they failed to do the thing they were very specifically designed for, but in a broader context of being a cruiser, they weren't completely terrible at it. They were still fairly serious threats that had to be dealt with. My particular nomination would actually be the Perlis class third class cruisers.
Oh, those things.
Because they did nothing that a gunboat couldn't have done, except that they were bigger and, as the name suggests, they just about merited a cruiser designation, which unfortunately meant that, being used as essentially overgrown overseas gunboats, they were expected to actually try and fight enemy cruisers, except nobody seemed to have thought about the fact that any enemy cruiser that is sufficiently long range to actually get to anywhere someone's stuck a Perlis class is
going to be big
by default going to be larger and more heavily armed than a Perlis class, which means the Perlis is going to lose horribly because it's not going to have the guns. They're third class cruisers and quite small, so they don't have really any armor to speak of, and because they're third class cruisers, they're slow, so they can't even run away. Because let's face it, the German cruisers like Emden and Königsberg and so forth that ended up wandering around the various oceans in the first bit of World War One, when you look at their actual capabilities versus a Town class or a Sea class or other contemporary Royal Navy cruisers, they're not really that much to write home about. But the one that showed up in Zanzibar, or wherever it was in that particular era, utterly dominated the Perlis class that was there, to the point the Perlis class physically could not fire back because it was so stupidly outranged.
Oh, yeah. And that German cruiser only had, 3.9-inch guns?
4.1s?
Yeah, 4.1s, and she'd still outranged this third-class cruiser.
Yeah. The third-class cruisers were basically... in my personal, somewhat harsh estimation, an excuse to have what in the Age of Sail would have been termed a post ship, i.e. a ship that you can nominally say this, you need to be a captain to have this ship, to captain this ship, and to look just impressive enough. Which... Basically to enable officers who aren't really worth all that much, but are coming from rather decent families to say, oh yes, I'm the captain of the cruiser, when he walks into they would have been much better off just going, stuff it, we'll build a bunch more gunboats. Or hell, no one would have expected a gunboat to... more gunboats could have done the job of the third-class cruisers just as easily and wouldn't have been expected to fight a full-size ocean-going cruiser. Hell, they could have just built more sloops. The RN still had and would continue to have sloops until the mid-40s. They could have done the same role. Plus, if one actually does get caught out by a German cruiser, and it does go down, it's not going to stand any less of a chance compared to a third-class cruiser, but you'll lose less people. Indeed. Destroyers, I think, is... I can't think of any destroyers that really... Oh, no, never mind, the German big ones. Yeah, that's about right. The German 6.1-inch armed MacGuffins, they failed at being destroyed. Rollin', yes. Rawhide. I wish to join the U-boat corps. No, I will not take no for an answer. Oh dear. God damn it, pre-war Germany. Why are you like this? You were doing all right with the Weimar design bureaus. Yes, the Deutschlands were a bit of a weird MacGuffin, but they were something of a step in the right direction. Although I still maintain they would have been better off building the 6
the 3 twin 15-inch coast defense ships they were planning to build instead. Because at that point, yeah, you'll have three ships with 6 15-inch guns each. They're gonna deter the RN from sending anything close to German waters. They're extremely useful in the Baltic. And what have you lost? You've lost a bunch of cruisers that didn't do all that much during World War II anyway. And you're also not going to randomly lose them doing things like, oh, I don't know, fighting a small cruiser squadron off the coast of Uruguay. They would have got more bang for their buck, in my opinion. Plus, we might have also had the Scharnhorst with 15-inch guns from the start, because they would have actually built something with 15-inch guns, so they could say, we've actually built some new 15-inch guns now for the first time in ages. Why don't we base our new gun design for capital ships off that, rather than 11-inch weapons? Because yes, the 15-inch guns would have been the old World War I type from the Bayerns, but they would have still actually forged them, cast them, built them, which is a big step in getting their gun foundries off the ground. But that's just my view on it. I may be completely wrong. Your silence is not filling me with confidence, Drac. I feel like I may have mistaken.
No, sorry, it's No, sorry, I'm still somewhat recovering from having my wisdom tooth out.
Oh, that's no good.
Well, I now only have one wisdom tooth left, and it's the one that never crowned. So I don't think I'm going to need to have any more of them out. But unfortunately, weirdly enough, the anaesthetic they used has left me with a bit of a cough, which is bizarre because I don't have any others. There's nothing wrong with me, except apparently it is a very limited, like 0.02% of people who have this local anaesthetic develop like a chesty cough apropos of nothing for a couple of weeks before it goes away again.
I'm just ill. I don't know what I've got, but I've just been ill for the past week. So, do you think the Germans would have been better off building the coast defense ships, or do you think they did right with the Deutschlands, or something like the Deutschlands?
I mean, a lot of it depends on what exactly their plan is. For what at the time was the Reichsmarine's plans to essentially have an overseas prestige ship that could vaguely menace some trade, but given that their plans at that point were looking at mostly having to deal with the French Navy, they make a very limited amount of sense from that perspective. And whilst it's only a very small amount of sense, considering that the French could just send out a reasonable number of heavy cruisers, there's a lot fewer French 8-inch heavy cruisers and even fewer light cruisers compared to what the British could bring to bear. So I think if they're looking at it from that perspective, the Panzerschiff do make a lot more sense. Because you've also got to figure that if they had gone for coast defense ships, again, if you're thinking about your main enemy being the French, a 10,000-ton coast defense ship, even against a Britannia or the one or two Corbett's they still had kicking around as mostly school ships at that point, the French Navy could have, if they, for whatever reason, wanted to, rolled in and crushed a trio of coast defense ships quite easily. Germany isn't like Norway or Sweden with lots and lots and lots of shallow water areas to hide in. I mean, sure, you've got the Jade Bar and everything if you absolutely have to defend Wilhelmshaven, but if you're at the point where the French Navy is sitting off the Jade Bar about to shell Wilhelmshaven, things have gone a lot worse than you have any right to otherwise expect.
And it doesn't matter if the ships are armed with 15-inch guns, it's not going to prevent the French from working them over with the Britannias.
Yeah, and the designs they were looking at were 12-inch armed in the 20s anyway. So, yeah, from when they were designed, the Panzerschiff make a certain amount of sense. From the perspective of how they actually end up being used, with getting in a fight with the Royal Navy and the Marine Nationale, and then later the Royal Navy, they're essentially a hiding to nothing, because no matter how individually powerful they are, no 3 ships within realistic limitations are ever going to be enough to put a significant dent in the Royal Navy's efforts to control the seas and manage trade.
No, that's fair. You've pretty much hit the nail on the head. There's nothing that either Weimar Germany or Nazi Germany can do.
I mean, it's the equivalent of like some random. I mean, even the largest navy in, let's say, South America. So let's go with the Brazilian Navy. If you look at them these days, the Brazilian Navy has built a relatively powerful navy, but they're very realistic about what they can and can't use their navy for. So, although they have a bunch of frigates and so forth, on average, their ships are smaller than the ocean-going frigates of the big navies in the world. Then they've got the HMS Ocean, but those forces are more than sufficient in number and quality to do patrol off Brazil and to go and beat up another South American navy if they feel that they have to.
As long as it's not Chile, because Chile's out on par with Brazil. But if it's Argentina, yeah, they can carry up Argentina.
Yeah. So at that, but then at that point, they've built the navy to what they need it for. Their Brazilian navy is not under any illusion of fighting the U.S. Navy or even the Royal Navy. A navy that can any navy that can actually put a task force off the Brazilian coast from somewhere that's not South America, the Brazilians have sort of tacitly acknowledged there's no way they can oppose that, at least just with their naval forces, so they haven't even bothered to try. And that's kind of sensible, because if you think, if Brazil was going to went and built, say, a trio of 12,000 ton destroyers, and they were like, yes, well, this will allow us to stop a US Navy task force if they come after us. Everyone would just be pointing and laughing at them and saying that's a pointless waste of money. And they'd be right. And so that's why they don't do it. So yeah, in some ways, when you're trying to build a Panzerschiff, especially when it's anything to do with what's going to happen if the Royal Navy gets involved, it's like, well, there is only one outcome at this stage.
They would just build more, work up, just build a 10,000 ton light cruiser. There, just build a 10,000 ton, 5.9 inch armed ship that's armoured against its own guns. There, just do that. At least that won't be useless. I don't want to think about the air defense Fuso. The air defense Fuso makes me cringe. I hate it. It's like you could have rebuilt it, and the person who did that edit could have rebuilt it any way he liked, and he chose to remove the fore and aft super firing pairs and keep the center line guns instead of the other way round. At least if you do it the other way round, you've still got a ship with 8 14-inch guns. It's a slower Congo. Why would you do this?
Plus, with the weight you've saved removing the central guns, you could build a multi-stacked pyramid of death.
Yes, the 100mm guns must fire all over everything. Darth Sidious asks, had Indefatigable been sent to the Falklands and the worst case happened, would this affect battlecruiser development? No. The RN had already moved well past the Indefatigable and their design flaws. It might prevent the explosions at Jutland. Might. Because the
Indefatigable can't explode at Jutland if she explodes at the Falkland Islands.
No, I mean the RN might go, why did Indefatigable blow up? And they might not.
Yeah, although to be fair, if Indefatigable blows up, her specific weakness is a weakness that's unique to her, because even Australia and New Zealand have at least 5-inch armor. I mean, that's not going to help tremendously against 11 and 12-inch shells, except at the absolute extremities of range. But the loss would then be down to insufficient armor rather than poor ammo handling.
So yeah, Jutland's still going to be boom. But in terms of armoured cruiser development, it doesn't really change much. Basically because the RN's already moved past it. Like, the big cats are already in the fleet. The next battle cruiser the RN will build will be Hood. The Admirals.
Well, if it's Falklands, it'll be Renown and Repulse. But the other thing might be you might see another battle cruiser or two built very quickly, very early. Because if you've got an early war loss of a battle cruiser, the Germans haven't lost any of their battle cruisers. Okay, Goeben shut up in Turkey, but it's still around. You might see the Royal Navy thinking we need to replace this ship.
Tiger gets a sister? Because that would be the easiest thing, just lay down another Tiger. Don't work up a new design, just get the hull on the slipway, get the frames laid out.
Although, to be fair, at the same time, you've got Renown and Repulsor being laid down. Their actual laydown date is January 1915. So with the Falklands taking place right at the tail end of 1914, it might actually be easier to just go, we're also going to build Resistance.
Yeah, that'll work. Which would mean we get 3 Renowns, which is nice.
And with the need for a replacement, they might also get the work on at least one of them might be accelerated. And also, actually, come to think of it, if it's clear that it's the reason for the loss is Indefatigable has insufficient armor, rather than being launched and then immediately recalled to have the armor upgraded from 6 to 9 inches, you might actually have all 3 Renowns built, from the start with considerably thicker armor.
It would help save a lot of problems, and that might also lead to the Admirals having the heavier armour layout from the start, mean they might not be so radically halted when Jutland takes place, if Jutland has the same outcome. Meaning we might see perhaps 2 of the Admirals commissioning, rather than just Hood. Bull Reeves asks, what if 4 Dido... Is it Dido or Dido? I keep forgetting. Either way, doesn't matter. We're part of Force Z, and by extension escort Prince of Wales... Dido, thank you. Prince of Wales and Repulse on their fateful journey. Well, if we've got 4 dedicated anti-aircraft cruisers, 5.25-inch guns or not... it doesn't particularly matter if they're 5.25 or 4-inch. They'll still do the job of breaking up enemy of the air attacks, even more than they would do in other occasions where you're calling upon them to do anti-air work, because they're firing at twin-engined medium bombers, which are not the most manoeuvrable things when it comes to dodging anti-aircraft fire. And also they'll have a great deal of 20mm and 40mm in addition to their heavy AA assets, which will help break up the strike even more.
Well, it's just also multiple target.
Yeah, it's...
I mean, we're assuming that, their systems function a little bit better than Prince of Wales's ones did the tropical heat, but considering that, Prince of Wales had done a brief stint in the Mediterranean, by 41 most of the in-service Didos had extensive Mediterranean service, so they're not exactly unused to hot and humid conditions. And of course, you've got the fact that having had extensive service in the Mediterranean, they've had extensive experience of being attacked by the Regia Aeronautica and Fleet Corps 10.
Who are currently the Axis' leading champions with Allied ships killed, although the Japanese are about to even that score.
So yeah, a lot of it is still going to come down to sheer luck, because you could have a case where the cruiser screen shoots down all of the incoming Japanese bombers except the one that hits the stern of Prince of Wales, in which case Prince of Wales is probably still going to go down the way she did, because once that propeller shaft is restarted, that's it, pretty much.
Yeah,
but conversely, all it takes is one shell to cripple or destroy that one bomber, even though they don't know that it is that one bomber, and the whole situation turns on its head again.
Because Renown was doing a magnificent job of dodging. Even without the other 4 dinos being there, she was just dodging and weaving like it was going out of fashion, apparently. Oh god, this is a question. Arnat asks, anything you would honestly praise BT for? I've already got
his political connections allowed. Although the Royal Navy did lose out on a bunch of stuff in the 1920s, in part thanks to his lack of capabilities, his political connections did allow the Royal Navy to keep or maintain a few things, or push through a few things that they might not otherwise have been able to. So he wasn't the worst option to be a First Sea Lord in the 1920s.
True.
And to be fair, actually, the other thing I would say, to be fair, BT was actually a pretty good officer as long as he wasn't the one in charge. So if BT as a captain or BT as a lower ranking admiral in charge of a battle squadron, he actually did pretty well when he was in those roles. It was when he was given the ultimate authority over a large number of ships, like the battle cruiser fleet and later the Grand Fleet, he was essentially promoted beyond his competence, but in large part promoted beyond his competence because he wanted to be promoted that high, and he leveraged his political connections to do so. In some ways, he kind of reminds me of Admiral Villeneuve, just on a slightly different tack, because Villeneuve, again, was actually a pretty good, solid officer as long as he was following orders. The difference between BT and Villeneuve is that when Villeneuve was in the position of giving orders, he kind of suffered a nervous breakdown and gave up on the idea of being vaguely coherent and competent, whereas BT was about as coherent and competent, but thought he was the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah. Zuikaku asks, Drac, do you have an opinion on the US Navy Plan Orange, Black, whatever games? I recently got Warplan Orange and Warplan Red, so he wanted to know your opinion, if you ever gotten them or played them.
I haven't played the game. If there are games called that, I haven't played the games themselves. I know about the war plans.
Apparently, yeah, they're made by an Avalanche Press Limited, apparently.
I've heard of Avalanche.
I'd never heard of them. Till
Avalanche do a bunch of stuff like that, but the problem is that, yeah, back when I was doing naval research and everything as like a hobby and a personal interest apart from my main job, I never really had the time to do as much wargaming and so forth as I wanted to, and the stuff that I was doing was, to be fair, at that point, and to a certain extent still is, stuff like 40k and Battlefleet Gothic. And now that I do naval history as a job, I don't entirely eat, sleep and breathe naval history. I do have other interests like reenactment and HEMA and still Battlefleet Gothic, etc. So yeah.
Fair enough. Oh, on the topic of naval games and things related to them, I understand that you've actually been asked to judge the Rule the Waves 3 ship design contest. That's an interesting kettle of fish. I already congratulated Brother Monroe on him getting into it, but that's that swings me back to the good old days of the channel when you ran the really good old days when we were running the Rule the Waves design contests. That takes me back. Like that was That's a flash from the past. I'm actually looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. Because, well, what ships you can design in Rule the Waves is very much based on what year you're in. I mean, I understand why they've set it up the way they have.
Yeah, well, there's two entry categories. There's one which is a 1920 capital ship,
which you use the 1920 start.
So it's basically, yeah, it's the immediate. It's you start a game in 1920 and immediately design a capital ship. That's one entry, and there's another, and the second category, which is a little bit more of an open category. It's still got to be a large ship, but it's kind of from 1880 through to 1920. Yeah, that competition started at the beginning of the month. Unfortunately, I think the deadline for submissions is today, because the judging live stream is next week.
Ah, I see.
Although, if anyone wants to throw a design together, you've still got, at least in the UK, 4 hours to do so, and it's actually not that. Doesn't take that long to put together a relatively decent design in Rule the Waves.
That makes sense. I mean, one of the I was more intrigued by the other suggestion, like, because the 1920s design, like, that'll be somewhat easier to judge out of the two categories. It's the other one, the one where you're basically being asked to judge ships that could be anything from an ironclad all the way up to an advanced capital ship right on the cusp of 1920.
Yeah, well, I think in that particular case, I think at least my way of judging those is probably going to be to compare any given entry, not to the other entries, but to compare that entry to the historical counterparts it would theoretically have faced off against, and then I'll be awarding the highest points to the ones that have the greatest capability gap. Or interesting design features versus their particular era. So if someone submits an 1888 ironclad and it's it's both plausible and head and shoulders above everything else in that period, so no 4 turret super firing mini super dreadnoughts, please, but if it's plausible but considerably better than the contemporary ships of the time, I'm going to score that ship considerably higher than, say, a slightly different flavour dreadnought from, 1912 that's maybe 5-10% better than the ships that were under construction on that year. Because although that ship is, massively more powerful than the aforementioned ironclad, it's not as great a leap over all the others of its period.
That makes sense. I mean, one thing I would say is that I wonder if they'll let you take into account the history of the ship in question. Like, if it's done any great deeds, if it's the warspite of that particular navy. Oh, just in regards to the Popular Mechanics drawings, we don't talk about the Popular Mechanics ship designers and whatever the hell they were smoking when they drew whatever the hell those things are. The curved battleship is wrong for so many reasons. I think you've already covered it, Drac. Same thing with the aircraft carrier battleship with the extendable deck. And as for the special layer of hell that the artist who drew the what I can only describe as a Habakkuk without the ice. Yeah, that's They must have been high on post-war optimism when they drew that one. Drac, are you familiar at all with the game Foxhole?
Nope, never heard of it.
Well, well, I'll not go into too much detail, but basically, one of the premise is basically a massive war where every single soldier, sailor is a player, but it runs all the way up into naval warfare as well. But one of the things is basically imagine the world wars never ended and they just went on for 2 centuries. And they came up with battleships that are basically, well, glorified coast defense ships, in essence. Because I wouldn't call something with 6 5.9-inch guns a battleship, in my eyes.
New. Although, if you've had 2 centuries of unremitting war, that's probably all anyone's capable of building at that point.
Sounds about right. Because you're basically looking at... You know what? That's a point, actually. If you're talking about a constant... Not what we'd call an apocalypse, where everything just goes away in a snap, like a nuclear war or something, but just 2 centuries of constant gnawing at the things that make civilization go and make it tick. No one's going to be able to build massive capital ships anymore. They might have some vague memory of what was, but they're not going to be able to build them anymore. Ah, someone's been very clearly talking to the German Design Bureau. Where? Questions. Have you ever played Frostpunk?
Nope.
No? Okay. Must be some... Crikey, come on. Ramblings without questions. This is unusual. Anyone got any questions? I don't... Oh, that's a good one. Darth Sidious asks, how did Fisher get his large light cruisers financed?
By calling them light cruisers.
Did that actually work? Did no one look at the plans and go, this light cruiser is 20,000 tons?
You're expecting the Treasury to actually know what they're doing?
Oh. That actually worked. They just greenlit it without actually checking. That worked.
Yeah, near enough. I mean, basically, Fisher just rocked up with some estimates and said, "Look, I need to build some large light cruisers." If you look at his various letters, he goes back and forth a lot over the justifications for them, but essentially the initial entries are Germany's building a bunch of light cruisers. Some of them are a little bit powerful. Okay, they're not necessarily going to be massively more powerful or even necessarily potentially as powerful as some of our later C-class cruisers, but we don't like the idea that the German cruisers might be even on a par with ours, so we need some large light cruisers to be able to take out theirs. And also the way a lot of intel reporting in World War One went, where it was always consistently massively overestimating what the Germans were actually building. So Fisher was essentially going, well, I want to build ships that can outfight what they're probably building now and outfight what they might also be building now and might think about building in the future. So yeah, big light cruiser. operating on a similar principle to the way the Arethuses were being used in the Harwich Force and so forth, except cruisers. And yeah, his initial submissions are surprisingly light on the details of armament, other than, you know, mentioning things like, well, we're gonna use the new 444-inch, you know, kind of not necessarily even a lie by omission, more of a lie by distraction.
So basically,
you tell people about all these things that you're going to do, and don't mention things like there are twin 15-inch guns on it.
So basically, just tell the Treasury only what they need to know, rather than what they should know.
Yeah, and by the time it came down to things like, we actually need to order some 15-inch guns, or repurpose ones that were built for the abortive last 3R class, etc. By that point, you know, things had progressed to a point the Treasury couldn't readily turn around and pull them out.
That sounds about right. Bull Reeves asks, what if Japanese AA was able to match US AA's effectiveness by 1943? E.g. they have some equivalent to Bofors, they've got some form of AA radar, and most importantly, something to replace the bloody 25s.
I mean, it's going to make things a lot more painful for the US Navy, obviously. But the Japanese are still going to face the problem that they have fewer ships, period. And also, in terms of aircraft, I mean, even ignoring the pilot numbers, etc., the US has aircraft that are physically more capable. At least, you know, without getting into the weeds of the latest model of Zero versus the latest model of Hellcat or whatever,
it's
the US ships are a lot. Sorry,
the terminology is called the limitation of tactics within military science. It's that, like, as much as the limitations of, like, tactical effect on the battlefield is, it doesn't affect the strategic or operational outlook of the war.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, you've got the fact that the US aircraft are just more durable. So, you know, if a Zero or a Val or a Kate or whatever flies into American anti-aircraft firepower, if it gets winged by a 40 mil or gets caught in the flak burst of a 5-inch, there's a reasonable chance that plane's going down. If you get the same kind of glancing effect on an Avenger, a Dauntless, a Helldiver, a Hellcat, it might go down, but there's a much better chance that it might not compared to its Japanese equivalent. Of course, if you get a solid hit on either one, it'll go down, but if the Japanese send a 200 plane strike at the Americans, they might get back, you know, arbitrarily, they might get back 30 aircraft. If the Americans send their return strike, that strike is probably going to be twice the size, and they're going to get a lot more than 60 aircraft back. They'll be considerably worse losses, but it, you know, as Sierra said, at the end of the day, those Japanese ships are going to be sunk or badly damaged, or at the very least driven from the field, which means the net effect of the battle is still a win for the US, even if it's come at a slightly more costly day.
There's also, to go in the weeds, because I like AA, as it's kind of technically my job, but half the reason of why the US was really effective in terms of AA is the fact that the US, in terms of an industrial capability, can just throw a metric ton of electrical and mechanical engineers at a problem and do anything they want with it. And that's how you'd spawn JHU-APL, that's how you spawn Bjords, massive programs into both the rearmament and sustainment of AA, because Bofors, as much as it's a good gun, it was horribly complex for its original intention, and the US had to basically redesign the entire gun for it to, you know, be mass produced, because in a war that is like World War II, you don't want to be artisanally making AA guns, you want to be industrially producing all these weapons. So, you know, it's the advantages of US AA make sense only with the fact that in the context of, you know, the US. because you can throw that economic weight in the US when you're untouched by the war and not having fuel issues and having all the rare resources you need. So
yeah, I think that's definitely something that it needs repeating quite often, because even when you look at something relatively basic like a heavy AA gun, the Japanese 100mm is actually a pretty darn good gun. But one of the advantages of the 5-inch 38 isn't just that it's a decent anti-aircraft gun, it's that the US can afford to stick them on everything because they can mass manufacture them. And
I mean, like, it should be noted, like, the US Navy could do it, but, like, they were, even Bofors, even at the industrial level of the US producing 40mm Bofors, the Army was like, we're not getting these. The Army was sticking with 37mm guns for most of their anti-aircraft work, because straight up they didn't want to be in the same, or taking up the same supply route, and they just had a bunch of 37mm laying around. And it's also familiarity, because if you have all your destroyers using 5-inch 38s, and all your fast capital ships using 5-inch 38s, and all your modern cruisers using 5-inch 38s. Okay, there's some older ones with 5-inch 25s, but never mind. Your carriers are using 5-inch 38s. It means anyone who's assigned to dual-purpose gun duty, 80-85% of everybody who's assigned to that duty in the US Navy has learned on the 5-inch 38, which means if they get transferred to another ship, there's no real learning curve, because they're operating pretty much the same gun. Whereas, the Japanese can have their 100mm, but if their manufacturing limitations mean that some ships will have 100mm, some ships will have the older 5-inch, some ships will have a mixture of the two, and there won't be as many of them anyway, that's still going to be a massive limiter on their capabilities. We called this the Volkssturm ammo situation in 1945.
The Volkssturm ammo situation. Oh God! Please don't make me laugh. I need to keep.
It's a fun thing to point out, because you can get in 1945 a Volkssturm rifle squad armed with an Italian rifle with Italian ammo, a British rifle with British ammo, a Russian rifle with Russian ammo, a Russian submachine gun with Russian ammo, a German assault rifle with a German assault rifle ammo, a German rifle with German ammo, and an Austrian rifle with Austrian ammo, and you still don't get a machine gun.
Very funny.
Oh, you also don't get anything to hold all the ammo with, so you gotta put some stripper clips in your pockets.
Funny. Yenna asked a very simple question. Could you fit the Scharnhorst 11-inch guns into the Der Flinger's 12-inch turrets in a 1-to-1 replacement if she survived into the 30s? Or would that not be possible? Would you have to rework the entire
you could...
I feel like even if you could, mathematically do it, you'd probably have some issue with, the magazine development underneath it, because I have... drag and drop turret replacements are not as easy as it sounds, because it's not just the top turret. You got to worry about the barbettes and the actual magazine itself.
Completely.
So it's not like I feel like you could mathematically do it, but at some question you just have to ask why.
You'd have to be you'd be pulling. You wouldn't get the Scharnhorst 11s in. No. So you'd be basically pulling the roof off the turret and taking out a 12 and putting in an 11. The 11-inch on the Scharnhorst is I think as Sierra says, from a purely technical perspective, it could be done. But considering that the new shells are going to be the wrong size for the hoists, and you're going to need to replace all the racks in the shell rooms and the magazine rooms, etc., you're essentially going to be ripping out the turret. You're going to have to lift off the turret completely, lift out the entire hoist system, strip out the magazines and shell rooms, replace all the racks in there, build a new hoist system, or do some very extensive modifications, which you'll probably come to regret later, to the existing hoists.
If I might ask,
and then pop the turret back on with the new guns. At which point, the only thing that's basically going to be original at that stage is the gun house. At which point you might as well have just saved yourself the trouble and just ripped the thing out wholesale and put a brand new design twin 11-inch in with all the ancillary stuff.
This actually ties into something that I was going to talk about anyway. Franz the Fox Demon asks, has Drac delved into wartime trains at all? The railroad logistics that supplied the war efforts. Now, that is an interesting thing, because I'm not sure if you remember, Drac, but we were going to do ramblings on the relationship between railways and the Navy before you went to America, but obviously the America trip came up before we could. But I'm sure you're in some way familiar with railways in wartime.
To a degree.
Yeah.
I'm also hopping back in at this point.
Yeah, I'm not surprised you showed up, given I only have to mention the word railway, and you pop out of the woodwork like it's going out.
I suspect the two of you will probably have a lot more in-depth information off the cuff than I will. I mean, yes, I know something about World War II railways, but to be honest, my two greatest areas of expertise when it comes to World War II railways is the scope, size, shape, and nature of the I call it a semi-armored train, because it just had a few armored carriages and the rest were just regular goods wagons that my great uncle blew up with his platoon of armored cars in 1944, which is a rather niche area of knowledge.
Please do tell. I am intrigued.
And a reasonable amount of information about the sort of the little trains that ran around naval dockyards, which are probably not what they're talking about.
I think he means, more general railroad logistics. Like, I am planning to do a part 2 to the one I did earlier, but in regards to the topic I was talking about, is more in terms of how did railway development and basically where were the mingling points? Like, when did the development of railways and navies cross paths? Because I know... Yeah,
I mean, that's something that probably someone else is better suited to tell than me, because...
Probably, yeah.
I mean, realistically, in from the naval perspective, in terms of direct interactions with ships, navies and railways really only cross paths twice, one of which is in the early steam era, when, the late 1830s, 1840s, even maybe through to the 50s and 60s in some cases, a number of ships that had steam power plants were literally steam locomotive boilers that had been stuck in the hold, because that was about the best you could get at that point. And then much later, when you get into the interwar period, mostly, although there's a little bit immediately, a little bit before that as well, but mostly the interwar period, there's another crossover point when people are trying to work out how to get efficient, reliable diesel engines into subs, and a number of nations to turn around and go, ooh, we have reliable working diesel engines on land, how about we just take the wheels off and stick the engines in our submarines? Particularly a lot of the US Navy fleet boats, because some of the early US Navy fleet subs, like the Sargos, the early Sargos, are absolutely hopeless with attempts to develop marine diesels. And then someone just goes, you know what, screw it, we're putting a couple of railway locomotive engines in here, and suddenly everything's
perfect. We'll just go talk to Electro-Motor Division and say, hey, those prime movers, can we, pass them? I'm requisitioning those for the war effort. Hand them over. I mean, the funniest thing...
Yeah, the reverse also happens a couple times post-war, with PT boat diesels being stuck into railway engines. The Class 55 in the UK and what was it called? Fairbanks Morse.
Yes, with the triple pistons. Yes, that's a good example of it being in reverse.
Yeah, but the other one that did it was the Fairbanks Morse over here in the States.
We did do some crazy things with railways. Of course, then let's not forget that pretty much every railway gun known to have seen service in the World Wars was usually a naval gun slapped onto a either specialised or not so specialised chassis. The only exception being the Germans with their Pizzazzi K5Es and the Doras. But even then, they're still outgrowth of what we would consider naval ordnance. And then, of course, you've always got some daft army officer deciding to try and use a railway gun as an anti-ship weapon, and falling into the same trap that all the other officers do when they realise, wait, how the hell are we supposed to aim this thing without an actual fire control table, or any form of accurate degree aiming, or any form of real way to relay data from the fall of shot, apart from one bloke with a pair of binoculars. There's a reason why.
I'm going to have to pop off in a second. Sorry, Fleet.
It's all right. I'm just very happy that you showed up at all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple of people were saying, "Oh, can we have the story time of my great uncle taking on a train?" I will have to go. I'll have to tell that another time because I need to go through his DMOB box and dig up the specific newspaper clippings and diary entries that he left me. Because it's. I can tell you the gist of it, but the details are all in there. But the very short version, the gist of it is that my great uncle Stephen, who was the second of 4 brothers, he spent the first part of the war in the desert driving armored cars, and in the latter part of the war, 1940. There's a period in the middle part of the war where we're not entirely sure what he did because the army refuses to tell us, which gives you some indication about where he may or may not have been. But by the very end of the war, he was back in armoured cars again, in a slightly more advanced ones, and his unit. There was a very specific term for this type of unit. Someone told me a few months ago. I can't remember for the life of me what it is off the top of my head. But essentially their job was to infiltrate behind enemy front lines and do recon in force and then sneak back through enemy front lines. So whilst the front line may be in any given position, their job was actually to be 20-30 miles behind that, doing further scouting. And there were kind of a pair of missions that came in quick succession that essentially involved similar kills on German units. So at one point because they operated in groups, they were driving along a canal or possibly a river, depending on whether you believe the newspaper or his diary. But anyway, this waterway had an armoured barge train on it, except that it was far enough behind enemy lines that the guns on the thing were all pointed in the direction of the front lines because they were expecting possibly air attack or something like that. And they were tootling up the road that ran next to this waterway, except they were on the east side. So they were on the ultra German side of things. So they drove up alongside this thing and went, all the guns are pointed the wrong way. How long till they figure out we're not standard pattern German armoured cars? Well, let's not give them this opportunity and basically hose the thing down while its guns were all pointed 180 degrees the wrong way and sank it. And then a couple of nights later, they were operating in the similar region, and they came across a railway, and there was this, as I said, semi-armoured train, which was essentially the engine, 3 cars along the train which had armour plating and guns, obviously mostly anti-aircraft guns, and the rest of it was just goods wagons, so taking supplies to the front line. At that point, they were about 40 miles behind the front line, and they crossed the sort of at grade level crossing. They saw the smoke, because it was a moonlit night. They saw the smoke approaching from a distance, and so they all drove up into a copse of trees about 100, 150 yards away from the line and just waited for the train to come past. And then the plan had been probably far too complex for their own good, but the plan had been, because there were 4 Daimler armoured cars, was that one car would engage the locomotive and each other armoured car would engage the gun cars along the train, so try and completely annihilate the train's fighting capability and then deal with whoever was left afterwards. Unfortunately, due to the slightly haphazard and slapdash nature of coming up with this plan, they'd agreed that this was the plan, but nobody had agreed as to who exactly was shooting at which car, which meant that all 4 of them opened up on the locomotive, which, well, yeah, I'm sure you can imagine a locomotive, a very large supply train powered by a very large German locomotive moving at speed with a lot of pressure in its boiler, didn't react very well to 4 40mm cannon hosing it down.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, so it turned out the way to disable the other 3 gun cars was by the fact that the other 3 gun cars ended up flipped upside down and on their sides and scattered across the landscape.
Jesus! I've heard of boiler explosions,
Yeah.
but that's ridiculous.
Well, basically, the engine exploded, flipped off the line partially, and the rest of the train, which was moving at a fair old clip, just piled into the locomotive. So everything just started scattering everywhere. At which point they decided that someone was probably going to come and investigate the colossal bang that had just happened, so they just very smartly decided we're going to be elsewhere.
You've got a lot of interesting stories, Drac. The heck of a lot of interesting
Oh, my
stories.
great uncle Stephen was great. He died in 2002, but when I was a kid, he would tell a lot of these stories, and I say he preserved them in the form of diary entries and newspaper clippings when the stuff he did was reported. But yeah, his entire war was basically go find something incredibly dangerous, possibly shoot it, and then run away extremely quickly before anyone could turn up with heavier firepower, because ultimately he spent most of the war in an armoured car and didn't fancy his chances fighting against anything that could shoot back with anything bigger than rifle caliber bullets.
Yes. Live fast and die young, except he didn't die young. That's an armoured car.
Yeah. Well, bear in mind, this is a guy who only stopped riding his motorcycle when he hit 80.
Well, that's... Crikey.
And that was largely because he decided that modern drivers didn't know how to drive, not because he thought he didn't know how to ride a motorcycle.
You know, that's understandable. I can... Having seen modern drivers, yes, I can understand that.
Yeah, but the other slightly hilarious thing, of course, was that, to be fair, my dad gave up riding his motorcycle to work for pretty much the same reason, except he gave up riding a motorcycle 6 years before my great uncle Stephen did.
Oh my.
I quite often used to think that if he had been allowed some form of firearm to go on his motorcycle, he probably would have ridden it to the day he died, because he would have just hosed people down if they'd got in his way.
Armoured car motorcycle. Just strap a 40mm coaxial on the side of the motorbike.
Yeah. When I get that when I'm able to relay those stories in a bit more detail, I'll also obviously been able to get his photo album out of his DMod box, so I can put up some photos of not necessarily the operations, because he wasn't taking photos while he was in the armoured car, but photos of him and his armoured cars and some of the clippings he kept and everything. He was by far the most reckless of all of his brothers, and when you consider my granddad who was the youngest, spent the war looting crashed German bombers for the ammunition, that tells you something about the pyromaniacal and danger-seeking tendencies of that generation.
Yeah, just a bit. That's yeah. Isn't that the same granddad who you were researching a video and then you went to see him and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember that plane crashed near me."
Yes, yeah. My granddad almost got taken out by a pair of crashing Fleet Air Arm fighters in 1937. Yeah, basically the only one of that generation who doesn't have any particular ridiculousness assigned to his name is Charles, and that's because he was on Royal Oak, so he didn't get a chance to.
Oh.
But yeah, my granddad spent the war looting crash German bombers because he was too young. He was 12 when the war broke out. Stephen spent the war charging around in armored cars, shooting things and running away very fast. And David, the oldest one, is the one who got the Distinguished Flying Cross for flying 2 full tours as a tail gunner and not dying.
That's balls of steel moment, because tail gunner was the one where you died the most.
Yep, that is literally why he literally got the DFC for failing to die. Yeah, that was always quite fun. I mean, if for those of you who are on Twitter or X or whatever the hell they're calling it this week, back when I was in Canada last year, the Aviation Museum in Canada was actually very kind enough to let me into their Lancaster. So I put up a couple of photos that I took because I've got his photo on my phone of him getting the DFC. And I was able to take a few photos of my phone with his photo on it in the turret of the on the turret of the Lancaster, which was quite fun.
The sad thing about living where I live, well, not sad, but because I live in Sheffield, been raised up round there, Sheffield was the big steel producer and on top of Yorkshire's coalfields, so during the Second World War, a large amount of the male population of Sheffield were reserved occupation, and they couldn't sign up, and basically were exempt from conscription. So all my great-granddad did was dig up coal for the majority of the war. And my granddad, who was only very young at the time, all he remembers is being in Matlock Bath when he was about 5 and seeing a 1,000 bomber raid go over his head. But that's all he remembers. So I don't have any exciting stories from my relatives, sadly.
Well, I've got one. My great-grandfather was in the Merchant Navy in the First World War. He had 3 ships torpedoed out from under him.
What? 3?
Yeah. Yeah, he survived all 3. After the third one, he in his own words, he basically said, "I'm pretty sure God was trying to send me a message, so I got out."
Either that, or he was trying to tell it, or either that, or he was a lucky charm for the ships that got torpedoed.
Well, who knows?
Like that's just once is just random, twice is okay. That's a little bit of an odd chance, but 3 times is a pattern.
Yeah.
Especially in the First World War, where you're more likely to get your ship shot from under you by a U-boat than torpedoed. Like, you're really unlucky in World War One if you're getting torpedoed, because that means the U-boat captain really doesn't like you.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I managed to find the pictures. I actually put them up on Twitter, so there you go.
I count myself.
I always find it quite funny, actually, because Fleet, you've met me in person, and I suppose some of you, the other guys have as well. But you know, I always find it interesting because there's my great uncle David there in the middle, and my great aunt Barbara. I always find it amusing to see like who sees a family resemblance there and who doesn't.
I see that. Yeah, I definitely see that. Completely.
Yeah, as you can see, he gave the DFC to his son basically as soon as he got it.
I'm actually very, very lucky. I was in the RAF cadets when I was a younger gentleman than I am now. And one of the perks of being in the RAF cadets is that you get to have access to RAF Battle of Britain Memorial flight aircraft that the general public doesn't usually get. Such as walking inside of the Lancaster, one at a time, but still, walking inside the fuselage of the Lancaster. So I have done the similar thing to you, Dragon. It's cramped in there. I wouldn't have liked to have been in there for a long sortie over Germany at night.
Yeah, although obviously having walked through there, you know it's more like Golluming through the Lancaster.
Yes, you're bent over double, though I was younger at the time, so I was alright. I was a little bit smaller than I am now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the... I mean, obviously he was sitting in the tailgun turret, so it's sitting down is a little bit easier, but yeah, it was always a bit of a sort of, not necessarily a bone of contention, but there was always a bit of banter around between David and Stephen, because they both said they spent most of the war sitting down, but there was always a bit of contention because David was like, well, I got to spend most of the war sitting down, but I had no control over where I was going, because obviously he's the tail gunner, not the pilot. And but Stephen would always be like, would always turn around and say, yeah, but at least if you got lost or crashed into something, it was someone else's fault.
That's very true. Oh dear.
I think it kind of reflected in the fact that Stephen never once had a road accident, which, to be fair, once you've spent World War II tearing around various parts of Europe and African armored cars, you're probably a pretty good driver. Whereas poor old great Uncle David wrote off a car about once every 6 years.
Oh dear. I mean,
never in high speed collisions.
Oh,
It was
no.
he was one. He was one of those classic. He was I think he was probably one of the single largest contributors to that statistic of, 90% of accidents happen within 3 miles of home.
oh.
He would like do, because he spent the last 30 years of his life over in County Durham, which obviously is the other end of the UK. So he would make really long drives down to London and back up home again to come and see either my granddad or us, and he never once had a crash on those really long drives. He would always have a crash when he'd gone like 2 miles down the road to pick up some milk.
Well, no, it's very true, because you're always really familiar on your own roads. You don't think as much as when you're going long distance. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I've got some photos of young me with my great uncle David. My great uncle Stephen, actually, it's really weird. My great uncle Stephen and my granddad both were not particularly happy being on camera, but they were obsessed with taking photos. So when my granddad died, I've got about 6,000 photos that my granddad took and developed. And when we were going through all of them to get some photos of him for the funeral, out of those, thousands upon thousands of photos, we found about 24 over the course of his life that actually had him in them. Whereas my great uncle David couldn't care less about cameras, but was perfectly happy to be on camera. So I've got a bunch of photos of me as like a toddler with him and my great aunt, which was quite fun.
I can't remember the last time I took a photo with my granddad, in all honesty. It's funny that.
I do have one photo of my granddad in an RAF uniform, because he was old. He became old enough to serve just after the war, so he had to do national service.
Ah. Do you know what? I don't have any recent pictures of my granddad, unfortunately. Never mind. I'm sure I'll find one. It's from him I got all my interest in railways. My interest in military equipment came from myself.
Oh, I
Although-
don't unfortunately have any photos of my great-grandfather. I have, well, there is one somewhere, I just don't have it.
Although, funnily enough, I do
What's
think...
really weird is like, if you look through the line, my great-grandfather looks exactly like my grandfather, looks exactly like my father, looks exactly like me. We all look like clones of each other.
Well, that does happen on occasion. Like, genetics does flow that way on occasion. I look a little bit like my grandfather and my dad, but there is a bit of my mother and my granddad Terry, which is funny because I have two granddads, or I had two granddads. Both were called Terry, which was great because I had to figure out what to call them both. So I decided on calling me mum's dad Grandad T, and my dad's dad Grandad Terry, and it worked out all right mostly. Because you call the name and both of them would look up. Oh dear. Although I do have to actually thank my granddad for my interest in engineering. Well, both of them. One of them was in steel and ran a forging shop in Sheffield, and the other one was a joiner, architect and engineer who worked on buildings like the Ponds Forge Sports Centre, designed and built numerous bridges on the Woodhead Pass. The road, not the railway. Unfortunately, my Grandad T died before I could ask him any of the adult questions about what he did and what he built. But, oh well, that's how life goes sometimes. Sorry, I've probably just put a down on everything. I apologise.
And I'm just looking for where I kept my phone, because I've got so many hard drive.
I know what you mean. I've got so many folders on my phone because I keep most of my photos on there. I'm trying to think of where the hell I
Well, there's a reason I'm trying to purchase myself an old decommissioned server and turn it into a NAS.
I know what you mean.
Network storage is useful.
I know what
Servers are useful.
But funnily enough, oh, that's cool. John the Frankophile says one of his great-grandfathers was part of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment in the anti-tank battalion that was forced to storm Omaha Beach because their 57mm AT gun couldn't be brought in with them. I told you the Americans should have bought Hamilcar gliders, and then they could have taken the 57mm AT guns with them. Like, that must have been annoying. Like, just you have to storm a beach because they couldn't bring your anti-tank gun by air.
Yeah, there's my granddad on the left in his RAF uniform.
Oh, if I can actually...
That is literally the only photo we have of him in uniform, and I suspect that's because, as you can see in that photo, he climbed a tree along with his friend who's in civvies, and physically was unable to get out of the way of the camera.
I see. Yeah, no, I see some Drac in that as well, Zubikaku. Minus the facial hair, but it's mostly the same. Then again, growing facial hair wasn't really the vogue until after the Second World War had ended. At least not in a big way.
Yeah, he was a very inventive chap. I mean, at one point he built his own reflector telescope for a high school project.
One thing I remember is walking into both of my granddad's garages and being like, "Oh, this is a fully fitted wood workshop." I had to resist the urge to push all the buttons and turn on all of the sharp saws and the hammer. Because after all, surely every garage has a small metal hammer in it. Surely. You know, and a small forge.
No, we didn't have that. We just had way too many fucking amps. My grandfather was an electrical engineer.
Everyone.
And we're talking with the...
It seems like everyone's grandfather was some form of something, which I do quite like.
Yeah. But his thing was theatrical lighting design. And well, not the design part, but actually the installation and rigging, and he would set up the lighting systems. So theatrical lighting instruments easily pull 1,000 watts, 2,000 watts each. So we're dealing with, a ton of amps. So I was never allowed into his workshop. Probably for good reason, because that's how you kill people.
Yes.
That's way too many amps for a 5-year-old to be playing with.
Yeah. I just got told by my granddad T not to touch any of the saws until I was older. I became older, and then he tried to teach me everything he knew. But I was a bit of a soft touch back in the day. I was very much I liked my books and I liked my model railways, but I didn't really like the really big buzzy saws that went. Didn't really have the stomach for it when I was younger. Although I will admit, there's nothing quite so incongruous as being in my early 20s and helping my granddad wind up his steel business because he was going bust. There's nothing quite so incongruous as driving him out into the Peak District to pick up a 25 kilogram lump of aluminium, load it into the boot of my car, and then drive halfway across the UK to hand it off to another person because no wagon was available to do it. One of the more interesting journeys I've ever made. Just casually. What? You telling me you guys don't casually move 25 kilograms of aluminium across the country?
No, I did drive an entire backseat and trunk load full of concrete mix in my car once.
Don't get me started. I did a massive construction project, and I'm not a constructorally minded gentleman. I'm not really. I've done more DIY than I'd like to admit, but I don't like doing it.
Well, I was. This was for my Eagle project because I actually went and got Eagle Scout. I was in the Boy Scouts, and we needed concrete because we were putting posts in the ground. So we needed the concrete to pour in around the posts. So I only had to drive it 5 blocks, thankfully. And do I still have those pictures? I don't think I do.
I know what you're going to say.
My car was tilted at a full 10 or 15 degrees towards its rear.
You should have hired a truck.
Well, the thing is, my dad had a cargo van, but he was out of town at the time, so I said, fuck it.
You shouldn't have done. I can imagine the suspension.
Yeah, relating to your tools experience when you were young, Fleet, as you might expect from that generation of my family, my granddad had a slightly different view on things. His view on things was, is young Drac able to hold and manipulate tools? If not, is young Drac able to hold and manipulate tools with both hands if I put something in a clamp vise? If so, if either one of these conditions is met, young Drac is old enough to be taught how to manipulate tools. So yeah, some of the few photos I actually have of me with my granddad are some that my nan took of me when I was about 3 in his shed, because of course, as any decent old British man, he had a shed.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and he was just like, right, we're going to learn woodwork. So there's this 3-year-old me double-handing a rip saw. And his entire approach to health and safety is the wood is held in a vice, and he's kind of standing behind me with both his arms around me, ready to grab me if I do something stupid. But that's the sum total of health and safety. So he taught me how to drill with the old hand crank drills.
Oh yes, I used to love using old hand crank drills.
Tooth and pinion system.
Yes.
And his sole reason for doing that was because he had an old school power drill, so plugged into the 240 volt.
Yes.
And you probably run, the big orange ones.
Yes, I know exactly what you
neon
mean.
orange.
Yes.
Yeah, he got an electrical motor about the size of a grapefruit, and it's basically just that in a plastic case.
Yes, it is.
In a Bakelite case. And he's like, his sole reason for not letting me use that till I was about 10 was essentially on the basis that if it stuck in anything, it had enough torque to just catapult me across the room.
Yes. I remember when I picked up that thing and used it for the first time on a project we were doing to set up a garden railway. And Grandad said to me, would you mind drilling me a hole in this bit of wood? And I said, no problem, I'll do that. Set it up, marked it up, put the drill in, pulled the trigger, and... oh, why is that bit of wood under my ankles? Oh, why am I on the floor?
Yep.
Because I forgot to secure
Yeah,
it.
You're
I missed
telling me
those.
both of our grandfathers had garden railways?
That was good times. Sorry, go on, Drake.
Yeah, I've got very fond memories. Like nowadays, I've got some pretty powerful drills, but they're all modern ones. So they've got things like the anti-lock slip rings in them. So if they jam, you just start hearing da 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 as it spins around on it, rather than breaking your wrist. But happily,
doesn't that take out the fun out?
Obviously. Well, yeah, this is the thing, but because my granddad passed away last year, we're still in the process of clearing his house. But I said to the funny thing was, it's like my dad and my two brothers were going through, and my aunt, and they would go obviously claiming things that they wanted, and then there's me with a cartload of stuff I remember from when I was a kid, and I was just like, does anyone mind if I take these? And everyone was looking at me like, why the hell do you want those? Because some people were like, I'd like this microwave, I'd like this computer, I'd like this, and I was like, but this is a set of steps that I used to stand on so that I could get up to the workbench, so that I could play with power tools, and this is the clamp vise, as like with the sliding iron rod that you use to tighten it. It's like that thing's like bent at 30 degrees from years and years of being over tightened. And then there's me with...
You're giving me the feels, Drax. You're giving me the feels for the old... just bringing back...
And then there's me also with the orange power drill of death. And I'm just like, yes, I'm still using this.
Oh, that takes me back. I remember one of the saddest things I had to do was the realization when I was thinking about when I spoke to my mother and said, well, what are we going to do with all of Granddad's power tools? She said, well, I've got nowhere to put them. And I said, well, okay, should I go around getting them out? She said, no, Jacob, you don't understand. I can't take anything out of the garage. And that broke me. Because it was all proper big equipment. So it couldn't be moved unless we got a proper full van, and Mum wasn't. She loved her granddad. She loved my granddad, and she loved the fact that he was this woodworking joinery god, but she couldn't financially fund it, which was a real shame.
At some point I've actually got to go back and clear out more of that shed, because my youngest brother has basically bought or been him and my dad have bought out my aunt's share of my granddad's place, and so he's basically going to move in there, but renovating it is taking a while. So I'm just like, okay, well, as you go through each room, we've taken most of the stuff that people want, but as they go through each room, I'm like, when you get to that room, let me know and I'll come and clear out whatever's left, because I'm making sure I'm making off with most of the tools, because my middle brother is a builder, and it was so funny because my parents were just like, oh no, you let him go and take what he needs from the shed first. And I was like, no, I'm grabbing the most important and you can fight me if you want. And considering I'm the only one who's into reenactment and humor, I was like, that's not a fight you're gonna win. So I grabbed the power drill and other things, which, to be fair, he didn't want. And then when I was like, okay, well, take whatever else you want, and I'll take the rest. And he went through it. And I mean, to be fair, there wasn't a huge amount he wanted, because my granddad had some power tools, but like with the orange thing, they're mostly stuff he'd bought in the 70s and early 80s, whereas my brother's got tons of modern power tools. So why would he need old stuff? and the rest of it is all really, really good, high quality manual tools. But again, my brother's attitude is, I've got all this really modern stuff. Why would I need the old stuff? And I'm just like, I'm just like, jokes on you, mate. You keep thinking that, and I'll get all the good old stuff.
The amount of times I've been doing DIY, and I would have killed one of my granddad's manual drills or other things that we couldn't take out. And I'm just like,
my attitude is basically like, you keep thinking all of that, and as long as you enjoy being wrong, I'm not going to correct you because it means I get all the good stuff.
Like, I would have killed for a manual. Because one of the advantages of some of those manual drills is that you can use them like other things. So you can put screwdriver heads in them and use them as
you can do anything.
Which is just, for a lot of DIY stuff, now having a manual screwdriver that's not just a standard handle one would be so useful.
Well, and also manual power control. If you're trying to do very fine work, you can put in just exactly the right amount of force.
That's what I was going to bring up, because one of the most useful things I ever bought was a good set of bits for a pin vise.
Oh, yes, I know what you...
Yeah, I just put up there in a photo that, so my granddad I think he's like 18 in that, 17, 18 on the left. So yeah, that is I think in total that's like a 15-foot long refractor telescope he built by hand out of wood.
Let me see if I've actually, because I think my mum sent me this, but it's in Sheffield.
That was it. Sorry, that was his high school finishing project.
Incredible.
Everyone else showed up with like joinery boxes and stuff that they'd made. And he was like, I can't bring in my project because it's too big. So they had to go outside. And and then they found this thing. And to cap it all off, you can see the terrain behind him. You see the fence.
Yep.
And the bank and the brick wall there. So all of that's a depression that him and his two surviving older brothers dug out to install the telescope in.
Wow.
The school weren't necessarily quite too happy with the fact there was a 35-foot radius hole in their playing field, but as my great-grandmother said to them, if you didn't bloody well notice 3 lads digging a massive hole in your playing field, you don't deserve to complain.
That's very funny, but also very, very true.
I just love the fact you've got these 3 schoolmates on the right-hand side, and they're just like, one of them's like, must look, and the other 2 are like, where the hell did this come from? And he's just sitting there just like, look what I made.
That's just, yeah, I get that.
Yeah. In any case, I do have to make a move now. So thanks very much.
You're very much welcome.
And thanks for letting me share some memories as well.
Oh no, completely. I've been happy to take a trip down memory lane with you because it's enabled me to share some memories as well. Just before you go, this is a slightly younger version of me, but this is me with my granddad. About 6 years ago now, but yeah, flat caps on both of us. 2 Yorkshire lads.
Excellent. See you later.
Goodbye, Drac. Well, there you are, folks. Story time with Drac and Fleet. Wasn't how I planned on this going, but that was great. I think I'll have to do that more often. Have Drac on Ramblings not just to do Discount Dry Dock, but just to share memories. And...
yeah. I'll have to dig up some old
I think
for next time.
I think that's what I'll no, actually, Franz, I feel better now than I did when I started. Like, massively. My throat's clearer than it's been for days. My sinuses are clearer than it's been for all fucking week. I don't understand it. How do I feel better now than when I bloody started? You know what? Sod it. I like that so much. I'm gonna do an executive fleet decision. I know. An executive fleet decision. Yes. Because, as both some of the things I've highlighted here have made apparent, but in other ways as well, I'm not Drac. I don't know. I don't know as much about naval history as he does. And trying to run a discount dry dock, it seems to take it out of me week on week. So while I will still run Fleet's Random Ramblings, I think the time has come to accept what I am and what I'm not, and move it away from naval-related questions. I will still field them every now and then, but I think it would also mean that Drac coming on here doesn't just turn it into a discount dry dock. Like, we'll be talking about things other... Like, for me, Drac coming on Rambling should be a chance for him to get away from being Drac, in a sense. He shouldn't have to worry about answering naval questions on here as well as elsewhere. He should be able to come on here and just have a ramble and a conversation. Because did you notice how much easier the conversation flowed after we switched off from naval topics? It was so much better.
Oh, yeah. I mean, assuming I can take off work that day, I'd be happy to come on for another train ramblings.
Yeah, the train ramblings one went much better as well. Like, it's... I think... Like, I might do some special related things, but I do think I'm going to switch off and move instead over to an idea of being not naval related. Naval aligned. Naffy corner? Maybe. This is the Naffy manager at Kuala Lumpur here. The old tea's ready now, sir. I will have a clear throat.
Eventually.
Yeah, it's just lifting stuff off my chest now at this point. That's all it is. It's not even tickly. It's just random. So it's how would I put this? How would I describe it? It's soon TM. Does Fleet's Naffy have yes, we have biscuits. Airflow has definitely helped. It's cleared a lot of the phlegm out of my throat that was just sat there clogging it. Oh, it gets better. It gets better. This is sir, these are the plans for a new type of guided Naffy. 12 Naffy pianos, 20,000 cups of tea, and 12 tons of buttered crumpet being shot 10,000 miles up and set up fully operational at the point of impact in 12 seconds. With this weapon, Britain will be unbeatable. Oh no, you don't understand. This is a missile that you fire at any point on the globe, and it sets up a fully operational tea room in 12 seconds. Why? Because if you give British troops tea and crumpets, they'll win any war you've asked them to fight.
This is the sole purpose of the British space program. Intercontinental ballistic tea.
Well, no. The missile doesn't do any damage to the impact area. And for those of you on the